Hello, and welcome to the Sleepy Fountain, a quiet space where the universe whispers its deepest secrets, just as you close your eyes, as you get comfortable and let the rush of the day dissolve into the night. Tonight we will be exploring the profound and silent depths of the cosmos, carefully deconstructing the birth of the universe. Before we begin our descent, it would be lovely to know where you are watching from. The Phantom travels to so many different corners of the world, and it is always comforting to imagine the peaceful rooms these quiet journeys reach. If you enjoy these gentle explorations into the edges of reality and want to support the channel, a like and a subscribe help more than you might expect. And to those who have already invited the Phantom into their evenings, thank you so much for returning. Please consider tapping the notification bell as well, so you do not miss our next voyage. And if the mysteries of the void turn out to be just a little too captivating, keeping you awake for a moment longer than planned, at least you will drift off having learned something beautiful about the dark. No rush, no noise, just knowledge, gently dissolving into dreams. To understand the cosmos is to look inward, into the silent, heavy expanse of our own distant origins. We exist within a vast, cooling, and ever-expanding architecture of light, gravity, and ancient dust. At this intricate web of galaxies, this tapestry of stars and voids, is merely the present state of a physical system that has been unfolding for unimaginable eons. Tonight, we will quiet the mind and observe the architecture of reality itself. We will journey backward, against the flowing currents of entropy, to witness the genesis of all things. We are going to travel back in time, precisely 13.8 billion years, to the absolute beginning. Settle deeply into your space. Let the immediate world around you dissolve into the background. The present moment, the localized friction of daily life, are infinitesimally small when weighed against the grand mechanics of the universe. Breathe in the quiet. As you exhale, allow your awareness to drift away from the present hour, away from the turning of the earth, and out into the deep, soundless vacuum of interstellar space. Imagine the universe exactly as it is right now, a sprawling, seemingly infinite web of dark matter filaments, illuminated by the slow burning of a trillion stars. In your mind's eye, begin to reverse the flow of time. Watch as the inexorable expansion of the cosmos slows, halts, and begins to retreat. Galaxies, which have been drifting apart for billions of years, slowly begin to draw closer together, pulled back by the invisible tether of gravity working in reverse. Frozen spaces between the galactic clusters begin to shrink. The ambient temperature of the universe, currently a fraction of a degree above absolute zero, begins a slow, inexorable rise. As we move backward through the billions of years, the universe becomes denser. It becomes brighter. We pass the era of the first stars forming from pristine clouds of hydrogen. We move further back, to a time before starlight existed at all, entering the cosmic dark ages. The universe is now a shrinking, homogeneous ocean of neutral gas, contracting under its own immense weight. The temperature continues to rise as the volume of space itself collapses inward. We reach a critical threshold, roughly 380,000 years after the beginning. The temperature is now so immense that atoms can no longer hold themselves together. The electrons are stripped from their nuclei. The universe transitions from a dark, transparent gas into a blinding, opaque plasma of subatomic particles and trapped photons. It is a brilliant, glowing fog, shrinking relentlessly. We continue our descent through time, moving closer and closer to the origin point. The physical laws that govern our daily lives begin to distort under the crushing pressure. We pass the first 3 minutes, where the ambient heat is so extreme that protons and neutrons are just beginning to fuse. We pass the first second. The universe is now an incomprehensibly dense, unimaginably hot soup of quarks, leptons, and their antimatter counterparts, constantly annihilating and recreating one another in a chaotic, blinding storm of pure energy. Still, we go further back. We cross the threshold of a trillionth of a second. Here, the fundamental forces of nature, which dictate the behavior of all matter, begin to lose their distinct identities. The electromagnetic force, which gives us light and binds chemistry, merges with the weak nuclear force, which governs radioactive decay. They become a single, unified electroabok force. As the universe continues to contract, the heat and density reach levels that defy ordinary comprehension. We approach the grand unification epoch, where the strong nuclear force, the glue that holds atomic nuclei together, seamlessly joins the electroabok force. Finally, we arrive at the very edge of theoretical physics. We reach the Planck epoch. We are now at 10 to the power of negative 43 seconds after the absolute beginning. This is a time frame so infinitesimally brief that the concept of time itself begins to lose its meaning. The universe, which currently spans billions of light years, is compressed into an area far smaller than a single proton. At the threshold of the known, we must pause and confront the concept of absolute nothingness. When we think of nothingness in our daily lives, we usually imagine an empty room, or perhaps the dark void of space, devoid of stars or planets. But even deep space is something. It has dimensions. It has height, width, and depth. It has a timeline. It is governed by quantum fields that fluctuate and vibrate. It is a fabric, a physical medium that can bend and warp under the influence of mass. The nothingness that preceded the universe was not empty space. It was the complete and total absence of space. There was no distance, because the metric required to measure distance did not yet exist. There was no darkness, because darkness is merely the absence of light within a spatial arena, and there was no arena. Perhaps most difficult to comprehend. There was no time. Time is a relative construct, inextricably linked to the three dimensions of space. Folding the four-dimensional manifold we call the space-time fabric. Without space to expand or matter to interact, the ticking clock of the cosmos was motionless. The concept of before the universe is a linguistic paradox. Asking what happened before time began is akin to asking what lies north of the North Pole. The geometry of reality simply does not allow for it. Yet, this profound state of non-existence was not entirely sterile. In the realm of advanced theoretical physics, absolute stillness is an impossibility. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle, a fundamental pillar of quantum mechanics, dictates that a system cannot have exactly zero energy, even in the deepest vacuum. There is a baseline level of quantum static. This is the quantum foam, a theoretical landscape where the rules of classical physics dissolve into a sea of probability. In this timeless, spaceless pre-reality, there were quantum fluctuations, temporary ripples in the fabric of potential. These fluctuations are the ghostly echoes of virtual particles blinking in and out of existence, borrowing energy from the void for fractions of a microsecond before returning it. It was a restless, churning state of infinite potential, waiting for a localized symmetry breaking. Out of this profound, timeless ocean of probability, a singularity emerged. The primal singularity is the most extreme concept in all of astrophysics. It is a point in which all the mass, all the energy, and all the space-time of the universe are compacted into an infinitely dense, zero-dimensional mathematical point. It is a state where the curvature of space-time becomes infinite, and the laws of general relativity, the very equations we use to map the cosmos, simply break down and cease to function. Imagine the mass of the Earth compressed into the size of a marble. Then imagine the mass of our entire solar system compressed into that same marble. Now add the Milky Way galaxy with its hundreds of billions of stars, its massive black holes, its vast nebulae, and force all of it into that tiny sphere. Keep going. Pole in the Andromeda galaxy, the Virgo supercluster, the Laniakea supercluster. Gather every atom of every star, every photon of light, every ounce of dark matter across the entire observable universe, an expanse currently 93 billion light-years across. Compress all of that unfathomable mass and energy into a space infinitely smaller than the period at the end of a sentence. This was the primal singularity, a state of pure, boundless energy. It was unimaginably hot, infinitely dense, and contained the raw, unshaped potential for everything that would ever exist. Every mountain that would ever rise, every ocean that would ever form, every planetary ring, every comet, every biological cell, every thought, and every dream was locked inside this dimensional point. The entire history and future of the cosmos were tightly coiled within a speck of infinite density. There was no sound in this state, for there was no medium through which sound waves could travel. There was no light, for the photons themselves were wrapped in a state of thermal equilibrium, unable to move or radiate. It was a condition of perfect, symmetrical unity. The four fundamental forces of the universe, gravity, electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force, were not distinct entities, but rather a single and differentiated master force, governing a system of absolute, terrifying order. The thermodynamic measure of disorder and chaos was at its absolute minimum. The universe was a perfectly ordered, perfectly balanced equation. It was a state of high tension, a coiled spring wound to the maximum physical limit permitted by the laws of nature for an undefined, unmeasurable non-duration. This singularity persisted. It existed outside the boundaries of temporal flow. It was a solitary monad of supreme heat and density, resting in the centerless center of a void that possessed no geometry. The physics of this exact moment remain veiled from our understanding. We require a theory of quantum gravity to mathematically describe the internal conditions of the singularity, a framework that unifies the macroscopic mathematics of general relativity with the microscale mechanics of quantum theory. Until that mathematical bridge is built, the singularity remains a profound mystery, a conceptual boundary where our equations return infinite values, signaling the limit of human comprehension. But we know that this state of perfect, infinite density could not hold forever. The extreme quantum conditions within the singularity were inherently unstable. The unified force was highly volatile, a delicate symmetry poised on the razor's edge of a catastrophic phase transition. Deep within the core of this dimensional point, a microscopic instability began to manifest. A localized quantum fluctuation, perhaps entirely random, disturbed the perfect thermal equilibrium of the singularity. This infinitely small perturbation was the catalyst. It was the slight nudge that would disrupt the grand unification of the fundamental forces. It was the tremor that would fracture the perfect symmetry of the primal state. The tension of the coiled spring reached its breaking point. The absolute nothingness that surrounded the singularity was about to be violently, irrevocably rewritten. Space itself was preparing to fracture and expand. Time was about to be born. The stage was set for the most dramatic and consequential event in the history of reality. The silent, motionless singularity was about to ignite, unleashing a torrent of creation that would eventually cool, structure itself, and evolve into the vast, beautiful, uncomplex universe we inhabit tonight. The burden of reality was coming to an end. The cosmic clock was about to strike the first second. The moment of creation is not a singular event that can be observed from the outside, for the simple and profound reason that there is no outside. There is no surrounding void, no empty room waiting patiently to be filled with cosmic debris. When we speak of the birth of the universe, we must consciously discard the image of a localized explosion, sending fiery shrapnel into a precising darkness. That is a human construct, limited by our experience within a three-dimensional world. Imagine the fundamental metric of space itself, the very fabric of distance in geometry, unfolding from a state of infinite compression. Every point in the universe was exactly at the same location. At times zero, the theoretical clock begins to tick. The primal singularity, that dimensional point of infinite tension, undergoes a profound and rapid destabilization. The perfect, crystalline symmetry shatters. Unified master force that governed the absolute beginning fractures. Gravity is the first fundamental force to separate, pulling away from the superforce and establishing its own distinct set of physical laws. This separation is a monumental phase transition, a subtle but permanent shift in the underlying quantum architecture of reality. Along with this initial fracture, the universe begins to grow. It does not move through space. It creates space as it expands. The distance between any two theoretical points begins to stretch, driven by an unimaginable and pervasive outward pressure. The immense thermal energy locked within the singularity is unleashed, flooding the newly born spacetime with a blinding, pervasive radiation. The temperature drops slightly from infinity, yet remains so profoundly elevated that the very concept of heat loses all practical meaning. We are operating in a regime of physics where the temperature is measured in non-ill lines of degrees. A heat so fierce that it prevents the existence of any structured matter. As the universal clock advances to 10 to the power of negative 36 seconds, an era of incomprehensible violence and absolute silence begins. This is the epoch of cosmic inflation. The universe, still unimaginably microscopic in scale, is suddenly gripped by a repulsive, pervasive gravitational force, driven by a volatile and temporary field of vacuum energy, often referred to by theoretical physicists as the inflaton field. The fabric of spacetime undergoes an exponential, runaway expansion. The rate of this growth is staggering, far exceeding the speed of light. This phenomenon does not violate the established laws of physics, which dictate that no object can travel through space faster than light. During inflation, nothing is moving through space. Rather, it is the fundamental grid of space itself that is expanding, dragging everything along with it. In a fraction of a microscopic instant, a volume of space smaller than a single subatomic proton is violently and silently stretched to macroscopic proportions. This momentary, hyper-accelerated stretching serves a critical, foundational purpose in the grand design of the cosmos. It smooths out the severe curves, the chaotic wrinkles, and the topological defects of the initial singularity. Inflation takes the microscopic quantum landscape, with all its violent and unpredictable fluctuations, and flattens it out, stretching the fabric of reality until it appears almost perfectly uniform. This immense stretching is precisely why the universe we observe today, billions of years later, looks remarkably similar in every direction. It possesses a uniform background temperature and a flat, uncurved geometry across billions of light years. The sheer violence of inflation acts as a cosmic smoothing iron, pressing out the extreme distortions of the primordial birth. Yet, this exponential stretching is not entirely perfect. At the absolute smallest scales, within the restless, churning quantum foam, there are always microscopic fluctuations. These are tiny, transient variations in energy density that bubble up continually from the uncertainty principle. During the fleeting epoch of cosmic inflation, these microscopic quantum ripples are caught in the sudden, violent expansion. They are instantly stretched from the invisible subatomic realm out to macroscopic scales, permanently frozen into the expanding architecture of the universe. These subtle variations in density, these stretched and magnified quantum shadows, are of paramount importance. They will eventually become the gravitational anchors for everything that follows. In the slightly denser regions of this newly expanded space, the gravitational pull will be marginally stronger. Over the coming eons, these microscopic imperfections will draw in the surrounding matter, acting as the invisible, underlying seeds that will one day blossom into the vast, sprawling superclusters of galaxies that populate our night sky. As it began, the epoch of cosmic inflation comes to a definitive halt. The repulsive energy field that drove the rapid expansion decays, undergoing a massive phase transition. As it collapses, it dumps its immense, stored potential energy directly into the newly expanded universe. This thermodynamic process, known in astrophysics as reheating, floods the cooling, hollow cosmos with a dense, searing ocean of fundamental particles and pure radiation. The universe is no longer an empty, rapidly expanding void. It is a chaotic, blindingly bright crucible of raw, unformed matter. We have now reached 10 to the power of negative 32 seconds after the absolute beginning. The temperature is a blistering, inconceivable 100,000 trillion degrees. Within this dense, superheated environment, the fundamental particles of nature are free to roam without constraint. This is the era of the quark, gluon plasma. Quarks are the most elementary building blocks of heavy matter. The tiny, indivisible constituents that will eventually form the protons and neutrons of every atom in existence are the carrier particles of the strong nuclear force, the invisible, incredibly powerful bindings that typically hold quarks locked tightly together. But in this primordial, superheated plasma, the ambient thermal energy is far too intense, and the kinetic movement of the particles is far too violent for any permanent bonds to form. The universe is a thick, highly pressurized fluid of free floating quarks and gluons, colliding, scattering, and repelling one another at speeds approaching the absolute velocity of light. It is a state of matter so extreme, so completely hostile to physical structure, that it can only be briefly replicated today in the microscopic collisions within our most powerful particle accelerators. The color charge of the quarks, the fundamental property that dictates their interaction, is shifting and trading in a blinding, fluid dance of pure quantum mechanics. Alongside this chaotic soup of quarks and gluons, the expanding universe is absolutely teeming with electrons, neutrinos, and their corresponding antimatter equivalents. This brings us to a crucial and silent war that will define the very existence of the physical world. For every single particle of matter created in this fiery, high-energy furnace, a corresponding particle of antimatter is also born. Antimatter possesses the exact same mass and the exact same quantum spin as its matter counterpart, but it carries an opposite electrical charge. This perfect mirroring creates a relentless, deafening cycle of sudden creation and instant destruction. When a particle of ordinary matter collides with its specific antimatter twin, they instantly and violently annihilate one another. Their physical form dissolves, converting their combined mass directly back into pure, unadulterated energy, emitting a pair of high-frequency gamma-ray photons. The universe at this fraction of a second is a boiling cauldron of matter and antimatter, continuously materializing from the dense background radiation, only to be completely obliterated a microcell later. Visible battle between matter and antimatter rages continuously across the expanding volume of early space. It is a perfectly balanced war of attrition, governed by the strict, unyielding laws of particle physics. If the foundational symmetry of the universe were truly perfect, the outcome would be bleak. Every single particle of matter would eventually find an antimatter partner in the dense fog. They would all annihilate each other, leaving behind a sterile, empty universe filled with nothing but a slowly cooling, fading bath of photons. There would be no hydrogen gas, no heavy dust, no burning stars, no solid planets, and certainly no biological life. The cosmos would be an immense, glowing tomb of pure radiation. However, texture of reality is not perfectly symmetrical. An incredibly subtle imbalance exists deep within the laws of physics, a quantum phenomenon known as baryogenesis, for complex reasons that are still being deeply mathematically explored by theoretical physicists today. The fundamental laws of nature show us light, almost imperceptible preference for the creation of ordinary matter over antimatter. It involves a process known as charge parity violation, a tiny flaw in the otherwise perfect mirror of the universe. For every 1 billion particles of antimatter that are forged in the dense primordial plasma, there are exactly 1,000,000,001 particles of ordinary matter. It is an infinitesimal discrepancy. It is a single, solitary extra particle of matter hidden invisibly among a billion annihilating, volatile pairs. As the universe continues to relentlessly expand outward, its internal volume increases, but its overall temperature gradually begins to fall. The raw thermal energy available in the vacuum to create new, spontaneous pairs of matter and antimatter slowly dwindles. Eventually, the temperature drops below the critical threshold required for mass energy conversion. The great creation engine shuts down, and only the annihilation remains. The great extinction begins. The billion particles of antimatter relentlessly collide with their billion matter counterparts. They erupt into a blinding, universe-wide flash of high-energy gamma radiation. But the single, extra particle of matter remains. It survives the great extinction. It is left behind in the expanding, cool aftermath, drifting without an antimatter partner to destroy it. Every single thing that possesses physical mass in the universe today is built from this tiny, surviving fraction. The sprawling, ancient galaxies, the burning cores of massive stars, the heavy, metallic elements resting in the crust of the Earth, and the incredibly complex molecular structures of organic life, all composed entirely of the surviving remnants of this early asymmetry. The physical world, our bodies, and the device you are listening to are all made of the residue. We are the faint atomic ash left behind after the grandest, most destructive conflict in the entire history of reality. The sheer volume of ancient light produced by this mass annihilation continues to echo quietly through space, forming a permanent, microscopic background static that still washes over the Earth tonight. The cosmic clock slowly approaches the 1 microcell mark. The universe has grown significantly larger and considerably cooler, though it remains a remarkably hostile, alien environment. The ambient temperature finally drops to a few trillion degrees. This subtle, steady cooling marks another critical, permanent threshold in the evolution of physical matter. The ambient thermal kinetic energy of the universe is no longer sufficient to keep the strong nuclear force at bay. The free-floating quarks, which have roamed unhindered through the plasma since the end of cosmic inflation, begin to lose their velocity. They finally begin to feel the inexorable binding pull of the gluons. This process is known as quark confinement. The fundamental laws of the strong force dictate that quarks cannot exist in isolation at lower temperatures. They must group together to neutralize their color charge. The strong force reaches out and binds the cooling quarks together in tightly locked triplets. Chaotic era of the free quark gluon plasma comes to a definitive and permanent end. In its place, a stable, heavy sea of protons and neutrons finally emerges. The basic, enduring architectural units of the atomic nucleus have been successfully forged from the chaotic fluid. The universe is now filled with a dense, rapidly moving fog of heavy nucleons, negatively charged electrons, and an overwhelming, blinding volume of trapped photons. Incomprehensible energy of the absolute beginning has finally started to condense into stable, permanent physical structures. The underlying foundation of all future chemistry is securely set in place. The cosmos is preparing for the slow, methodical, and profoundly beautiful construction of the very first chemical elements. We have moved through an eternity of physical transformations, yet we are only now closing in on the end of the very first second of time. The grand hand of the cosmic clock passes the 1 second mark. We have left behind the incomprehensible fractions of the absolute beginning. Yet the universe remains a place of profound and hostile extremes. The temperature rests steadily at 10 billion degrees. The volume of space, though vast compared to the singularity, is still a dense, suffocating light arena. Within this expanding theater, a new phase of physical evolution is about to commence. The raw materials have been successfully milled. The heavy protons and neutrons, forged from the cooling quark plasma, now drift in a blinding, high-velocity storm of electrons, neutrinos, and an immeasurable volume of trapped light. At this precise moment, an invisible but monumental shift occurs in the background architecture of the cosmos. The ghostly particles known as neutrinos, which had previously interacted heavily with the dense matter, suddenly decouple from the rest of the universe. The expansion has stretched the fabric of space just enough, and the density has dropped just enough that these elusive particles no longer collide with the surrounding plasma. They slip quietly into the background, streaming freely through the void, carrying with them the secret thermal history of the first second. They form a silent, untouchable background radiation that still permeates every cubic inch of space today, passing through planets and biological bodies without leaving a trace. With the neutrinos detached, the primary interaction within the universe is the relentless collision between protons, neutrons, and photons. The ambient heat is still so intense that the basic building blocks of matter are moving at incredibly high velocities. They crash into one another with immense kinetic energy. This sets the stage for the epic of Big Bang nucleus synthesis, the brief and violent era where the very first chemical elements are hammered into existence. It is a cosmic forge, a period of nuclear fusion that will permanently dictate the elemental composition of the entire universe. The process begins with a delicate and volatile dance between protons and neutrons. A proton, carrying a positive electrical charge, is essentially the nucleus of a hydrogen atom. For a heavier element to form, a proton must fuse with a neutron, creating a fragile isotope known as deuterium. However, the universe at this moment is plagued by a critical barrier known to astrophysicists as the deuterium bottleneck. Whenever a proton and a neutron successfully bind together, creating a nucleus of deuterium, the surrounding environment immediately tears it apart. The universe is flooded with high-energy gamma-ray photons. the residual light from the great matter-antimatter annihilation. These photons act as billions of microscopic hammers. They violently strike the newly formed deuterium nuclei with such immense energy that the strong nuclear force is instantly overwhelmed. The delicate bond is shattered, and the proton and neutron are violently separated once again. The forge is too hot. The hammer blows of the trapped light are too severe for 2 agonizing, elongated minutes. This cycle of creation and destruction continues. Protons and neutrons relentlessly attempt to fuse, only to be instantly obliterated by the blinding storm of radiation. The universe continues to expand, and as it expands, the wavelength of the trapped photons is physically stretched. As their wavelength stretches, their energetic frequency drops. The microscopic hammers begin to lose their force. As the cosmic clock approaches the 3-minute mark, the ambient temperature falls below 1 billion degrees. The energy of the background photons drops below the exact binding energy of the deuterium nucleus. The bottleneck breaks. The rapid, destructive shattering ceases. For the first time in the history of reality, stable nuclei of deuterium are allowed to persist. With the survival of deuterium, a rapid and beautiful cascade of nuclear reactions instantly ignites across the entirety of the expanding cosmos. The stable deuterium nuclei quickly collide with other protons and neutrons. The strong nuclear force reaches out, grasping these particles and binding them tightly into configurations of immense stability. Deuterium fuses to become tritium, and tritium fuses with ordinary protons to forge the nucleus of helium-4. Helium-4 is an incredibly stable atomic structure, consisting of 2 protons and 2 neutrons tightly bound in a state of deep energetic equilibrium. The universe enthusiastically embraces this stability. In a span of less than 17 minutes, a profound wave of nuclear synthesis sweeps through the dense plasma. Nearly all of the available free neutrons in the universe are rapidly gathered up and locked securely inside the heavy, stable vaults of helium nuclei. A tiny fraction of these collisions produces trace amounts of slightly heavier elements. A microscopic scattering of lithium and beryllium is forged in the chaotic crossfire. But the rapid expansion of the universe is a relentless clock. As the cosmos stretches outward, the density of the nuclear fuel drops dramatically. The particles become to spread out, too distant from one another to maintain the high collision rates required for continued fusion. Simultaneously, the temperature falls well below the threshold needed to overcome the electrostatic repulsion between the positively charged protons. At precisely 20 minutes after the absolute beginning, the fires of the cosmic fridge are permanently extinguished. Big Bang nucleus synthesis abruptly ends. The elemental composition of the universe is locked into place, completely frozen. The mathematical precision of this brief hour is breathtaking. The universe is left composed of roughly 75% hydrogen nuclei, alone. Unbound protons that did not find a partner. The remaining 25% consists of the newly forged helium nuclei, with a barely measurable dusting of lithium. This exact elemental ratio, forged in the dark heat of the first 20 minutes, remains the fundamental baseline composition of the universe today. Every star that will ever burn, every gas giant that will ever form, will be constructed from this ancient, primordial ratio of hydrogen and helium. The raw materials for the future have been permanently cast. With the heavy lifting of nuclear fusion complete, the universe enters a long, silent, and agonizingly slow period of cooling and expansion. This is the era of the photon baryon fluid, a time frame that will stretch out for hundreds of thousands of years. The universe is no longer characterized by rapid, violent phase transitions. Instead, it becomes a marathon of endurance, a steady, inexorable settling of the physical state. During this vast epoch, the universe is a blindingly bright, completely opaque fog. It is a dense, high-pressure plasma consisting of the newly forged atomic nuclei, a swirling sea of fast-moving electrons, and an unimaginably dense concentration of photons. The temperature is still measured in tens of thousands of degrees, far too hot for the negatively charged electrons to settle down and bind to the positively charged nuclei. The electrons remain completely unattached, moving freely and rapidly through the expanding void. This sea of free electrons creates an impenetrable barrier for light. The fundamental particles of light carry electromagnetic force. They are highly reactive to charged particles. In this dense plasma, a photon cannot travel more than a microscopic fraction of a millimeter before violently colliding with a free roaming electron. This process, known as Thomson scattering, completely traps the light. Imagine attempting to drive through a heavy, impenetrable blizzard with your high beams on. The light does not travel forward. It simply reflects off the dense wall of snow, creating a blinding, directionless glow. This was the exact state of the early universe. The photons were entirely bound to the matter, endlessly bouncing, ricocheting, and scattering off the chaotic swarm of electrons. The universe was filled with light, yet it was completely opaque. It was an endless, glowing whiteout, a hall of microscopic mirrors where a single beam of light was hopelessly trapped in a tortuous, zigzagging prison of plasma. Because the light and matter were locked together in this constant, violent interaction, they acted as a single, unified fluid. Astrophysicists refer to this state as the photon-bearing plasma. And like any physical fluid, this primordial ocean was subject to the mechanical forces of pressure and gravity. Within this blinding fog, a silent, unseen battle was taking place. The invisible dark matter, which had been stretched into subtle webs of varying density during the violent epoch of cosmic inflation, began to exert its gravitational pull. Dark matter does not interact with light or electromagnetism. It is completely immune to the blinding blizzard of photons. The dark matter was entirely free to quietly gather, pulling together into denser invisible clumps, completely undisturbed by the chaotic storm of radiation. As the dark matter clumped together, its gravity reached out and pulled the ordinary matter, the protons, helium nuclei, and electrons inward toward the denser regions. The normal matter began to fall into the invisible gravitational wells created by the dark matter. As the ordinary matter compressed into these dense pockets, the trapped photons were forced closer together. The compression of the light drastically increased the radiation pressure, heating the plasma. The immense outward pressure of the trapped radiation overpowered the inward pull of gravity. The dense buckets of plasma violently rebounded, exploding outward in a massive, spherical wave of pressure. The matter was pushed away, only to eventually slow down, cool, and be pulled back inward once again by the unrelenting gravity of the dark matter. This rhythmic cycle of gravitational compression and radiative expansion created monumental sound waves that rippled through the dense plasma of the early universe. These immense acoustic waves, known as baryon acoustic oscillations, were the fundamental heartbeat of the cosmos. They were physical pressure waves, traveling at more than half the speed of light through the glowing, opaque fluid. The universe was ringing like a massive, expanding bell, vibrating with the deep, resonant frequencies of these cosmic sound waves. These massive, spherical ripples of matter and light carried unimaginable energy, compressing the plasma as they crashed outward from the dark matter centers. They established the vast, underlying geometric spacing that would one day dictate the large-scale structure of the universe. The peaks and troughs of these ancient sound waves laid the precise mathematical foundation for where the future superclusters of galaxies would eventually form. The cosmic web we observe today is merely the frozen, silent echo of this ancient, ringing plasma. For nearly 400,000 years, this dynamic, vibrating state persists. The universe expands, the baseline temperature drops imperceptibly year by year, and the massive sound waves continue their slow, relentless march across the glowing void. The intense, blinding heat of the absolute beginning has given way to a heavy, suffocating warmth. The frantic pace of creation has slowed to a methodical, crawling evolution. As we approach the end of this dense epoch, the ambient temperature of the universe is slowly nearing 3000 Kelvin. The vast volume of space has expanded immensely, thinning out the primordial soup. The relentless kinetic energy that has kept the electrons violently agitated is finally beginning to wane. The immense pressure of the trapped photons is steadily weakening. The architectural foundations are fully mature. The elemental blocks are forged, and the massive gravitational blueprints have been drawn by the ancient sound waves. The universe is quietly preparing for another fundamental phase transition. A long, agonizing captivity of light is drawing to a close. The relentless, blinding fog is about to lift. The invisible forces of atomic chemistry are preparing to assert their dominance over the chaotic plasma, setting the stage for a moment of profound cosmic liberation. We are standing on the precipice of the grand release, the era of recombination, where the darkness of true space will finally be born. The hands of the cosmic clock continue their relentless, silent sweep forward. We have drifted through the turbulent, blinding epochs of the primordial plasma, navigating a universe dominated by intense radiation and the chaotic, high-velocity collisions of charged particles. For 380,000 years, the cosmos has been a prison of light, an opaque, suffocating fog where every photon was inextricably bound in a violent, endless dance with free-roaming electrons. But the architecture of reality is defined by continuous, inexorable expansion. And with that expansion comes a profound, permanent cooling. The immense, crushing heat of the absolute beginning has finally dissipated across the stretching geometry of spacetime. We are approaching a monumental threshold in the physical evolution of the universe, a critical temperature boundary that will fundamentally alter the nature of light and matter forever. The ambient temperature of the expanding void slowly descends, approaching exactly 3000 degrees Kelvin. To an existed, the universe would no longer possess the blinding, incomprehensible white heat of the earlier epochs. Entire volume of space would glow with a heavy, pervasive, deep orange luminance. It is the color of a dying ember, stretching infinitely in every conceivable direction. The density of the plasma has plummeted. The distance between the microscopic particles has grown significantly. Most importantly, the kinetic energy of the universe, the frantic, agitated movement of the subatomic building blocks, has finally dropped to a manageable level. The restless sea of electrons, which have sped freely through the void since the first microscopic fractions of a second, are beginning to lose their immense velocity. They are slowing down. As the electrons lose their frantic kinetic energy, they can no longer resist the fundamental forces of electromagnetism. The heavy, positively charged atomic nuclei, the single protons of hydrogen and the paired protons of helium forged during the brief era of nucleus synthesis have been waiting patiently. They exert a steady, invisible electrostatic pull on the surrounding environment. Up until this exact moment, the electrons were simply moving too fast, possessing too much thermal energy to be captured. But as the temperature slips below the 3000 degree mark, the electrostatic attraction finally overpowers the thermal agitation. Universe-wide cascade. The heavy atomic nuclei reach out and pull the slowing electrons into their orbit. This is the epoch of recombination. It is a slightly misleading term, as the electrons and nuclei are combining for the very first time, not recombining. But the scientific nomenclature remains. Across the vast, stretching expanse of the cosmos, billions upon billions of electrons fall into precise quantum mechanical orbits around the protons. The electrical charges perfectly cancel each other out. The single positive charge of the proton is neutralized by the single negative charge of the orbiting electron. The technically charged plasma, which has defined the universe since its birth, is rapidly, systematically dismantled. In its place, a calm, stable, and electrically neutral gas emerges. The first true atoms of hydrogen and helium are born. This transition from an ionized plasma to a neutral gas is not merely a chemical milestone. It triggers the most dramatic sensory shift in the history of reality. The early universe was entirely due to the free electrons acting as a dense, impenetrable wall for the photons. Light simply could not travel through the swarm of charged particles without being violently scattered. But as the electrons are suddenly removed from the open space, securely locked into their tight atomic orbits, the microscopic walls come tumbling down. The physical barrier disappears. The space between the newly formed neutral atoms is vast, empty, and perfectly clear. In an instant of cosmic proportions, the dense, glowing fog is lifted. The process of Thomson scattering, which had trapped the light for nearly 400,000 years, abruptly ceases. This is the exact moment of photon decoupling. The light is suddenly and permanently severed from the matter. The photons, which had been endlessly ricocheting in the microscopic hall of mirrors, suddenly find themselves with an infinite open runway. They stream outward, unimpeded, traveling in perfectly straight lines across the newly transparent void. The universe flashes into perfect crystal clarity. The great release has occurred. The light that was freed at this precise moment did not vanish. It is the oldest light in existence. The primordial flash of the universe transitioning from opaque to transparent. Astrophysicists refer to this exact boundary as the surface of last scattering. It represents the ultimate visual limit of the cosmos, the farthest back in time we can ever hope to see using the electromagnetic spectrum. Before this moment, the universe is a closed, glowing wall. But the light released from that wall has been traveling through space continuously for the last 13.8 billion years, moving at a constant, unwavering velocity of 299,792 kilometers per second. As you lie still, breathing deeply in the quiet of the present moment, consider that this ancient, primordial light is passing through your room right now. It is washing over the surface of the earth, raining down from every direction in the night sky. However, you cannot see it with your naked eyes. When the light was first released, it was a heavy, intense visible radiation. But over the billions of years, it has spent traveling toward us. The physical fabric of space itself has continued to expand. And as the space stretched, it grabbed hold of the traveling photons and physically stretched their wavelength. The geometry of the universe has expanded by a factor of roughly 1090 since the era of recombination. Consequently, the wavelength of that original, glowing orange light has been stretched by that exact same mathematical factor. The light has been redsphyded, its energy diluted, its frequency stretched far beyond the visible spectrum, past the infrared, and deep into the microwave band of the electromagnetic spectrum. Today, we detect this ancient flash not as heat or visible light, but as a faint, omnipresent, and deeply freezing static. It is the cosmic microwave background radiation. The cosmic microwave background is the residual thermal echo of creation. Its temperature has dropped from the blinding 3000 degrees Kelvin at the moment of release to a chilling 2.7 degrees above absolute zero today. It is a whisper of the absolute beginning, a perfect, uniform static that fills the entirety of the modern universe. When you see the black and white static on an old, unturned analog television set, a small percentage of that visual noise is the physical interception of these ancient, stretched photons, striking the antenna after a 13 billion year journey through the expanding dark. It is the literal, physical ghost of the early universe, a permanent, freezing shadow of the Great Release. But with the sudden release of this light, the universe undergoes another profound, almost melancholic transition. As the photons stream away, unimpeded by the newly formed neutral hydrogen gas, they leave the matter behind, no longer propped up or heated by the constant, violent bombardment of radiation, begins to cool rapidly. The deep orange glow of the cooling plasma slowly fades. The physical volume of space continues to stretch outward, expanding relentlessly, driving the ambient temperature down further and further. The universe dims. The vibrant, glowing, high-energy theater of the early cosmos slowly shuts down. The light stretches into invisible wavelengths, and the temperature plummets toward absolute zero. A profound and absolute darkness falls over the cosmos. We have entered the era known to astrophysicists as the cosmic Dark Ages. The Dark Ages represent an agonizingly slow, silent stretch of time, completely devoid of any visible illumination. There are no galaxies, no nebulae, and no glowing accretion disks. Most importantly, there are no stars. The universe is a vast, expanding, and perfectly black void, filled entirely with a cold, invisible, drifting ocean of neutral hydrogen and helium gas. It is a sensory deprivation chamber on a cosmic scale. If you were to observe the universe during this epoch, you would see absolutely nothing. It is a state of deep, undisturbed rest, a profound, chilling quiet that will persist for hundreds of millions of years. Yet, within this absolute darkness, hidden from any potential observation, the silent, inexorable mechanics of gravity are hard at work. The universe may be dark, but it is not entirely smooth. Remember the microscopic quantum fluctuations that worst reach to microscopic scales during the violent fraction of a second of cosmic inflation. Those subtle variations in density, those ancient acoustic waves that rippled through the dense plasma, were frozen into the distribution of the neutral gas when the universe became transparent. The distribution of matter in the Dark Ages is slightly uneven. There are vast regions where the hydrogen gas is infinitesimally denser, and equally vast regions where the gas is infinitesimally thinner. In the architecture of the cosmos, density is destiny. Woven deeply into this uneven distribution of ordinary gas is the dark matter. The dark matter, invisible and completely immune to the electromagnetic force, has been steadily and quietly clumping together for hundreds of thousands of years, entirely undisturbed by the frantic battle between light and plasma. In the freezing silence of the Dark Ages, the immense dark matter halos act as the invisible scaffolding of the future universe. The gravitational pull of these massive, unseen structures reaches out into the cold, black void. Very slowly, with the agonizing patience of deep time, the dark matter begins to drag the drifting clouds of neutral hydrogen gas inward. The hydrogen is pulled from the thinner voids, drawn inexorably toward the denser gravitational wells. It is a monumental, invisible gathering. Falling rivers of cold hydrogen gas flow silently through the darkness, following the underlying gravitational blueprints drawn at the beginning of time. The gas begins to pool, to compress, to accumulate within the centers of the dark matter halos. The Dark Ages are not a period of stagnation, but rather a long, necessary incubation. The universe is drawing a deep, unseen breath, pulling its raw materials together, preparing the stage for the next great phase transition. As the hydrogen gas falls deeper into the gravitational wells, it begins to compress. As it compresses, the friction between the atoms slowly begins to generate heat. The absolute cold of the Dark Ages is gradually, locally, beginning to warm. Deep within the hearts of these invisible, condensing clouds, the density of the gas is reaching critical levels. The fundamental forces are aligning once again, preparing to reignite the fires of creation. The long, silent night of the cosmos is slowly advancing toward a spectacular, violent dawn. That is a highly pressurized quiet. The universe is resting, but it is the rest of a coiled spring. The stage is set, the invisible architecture is built, and the fuel has been carefully gathered in the dark. We are moving steadily toward the end of the long night, toward the ignition of the cosmic dawn, where the crushing weight of gravity will finally compress the cold hydrogen, gas enough to shatter the darkness forever, birthing the very first generation of stars to illuminate the ancient void. Chunk 5. The Cosmic Dawn and the First Leviathaness. The Dark Ages of the cosmos are not measured in days or years, but in the slow, agonizing turn of astronomical eons. For hundreds of millions of years, the universe exists in a state of absolute, perfect sensory deprivation. There is no sunrise, no starlight, no glowing nebulae to break the suffocating expanse of the black void. The universe is a cold, expanding ocean of neutral hydrogen and helium, steadily drifting, steadily cooling, stretching continuously outward into an ever-deepening chill. The temperature of this gas drops precipitously, plunging toward the absolute zero of the thermodynamic scale. It is a profound, heavy silence, a quiet so deep that it borders on the architectural. Yet, as you rest in the present moment, surrounded by the faint ambient light of your own environment, understand that this ancient darkness was not empty. It was heavily pregnant with potential. Woven inextricably through the blackness was the massive, invisible web of dark matter. These colossal structures, immune to the forces of light and friction, had been quietly amassing their gravitational strengths since the violent fraction of a second of cosmic inflation. Invisible valleys in the fabric of space-time, massive gravitational wells that exerted a slow, inexorable pull on the surrounding environment. Gradually, with the infinite patience of deep time, the drifting clouds of cold hydrogen gas begin to feel this pull, which have been floating freely and aimlessly through the void, are drawn toward the center of these dark matter halos. The gas begins to flow, etistic migration on a scale that defies human comprehension. Vast, invisible rivers of hydrogen, spanning thousands of light years across, stream downward into the gravitational valleys, accumulating, pooling, and slowly compressing in the deep, unseen centers. As the gas gathers, the physical density of these localized regions begins to rise. However, the fundamental laws of thermodynamics dictate a severe obstacle to creation. As gas compresses under the weight of gravity, the friction between the rapidly colliding atoms generates heat. This thermal energy creates an outward pressure, a physical resistance that pushes back against the crushing inward force of gravity. If the gas becomes too hot, the outward thermal pressure will perfectly balance the inward pull, and the cloud will simply stabilize, forming a warm, stagnant, and eternal sphere of dark gas. For a star to be born, the cloud must find a way to bleed off this excess heat. It must find a way to cool itself while actively collapsing. In the pure, uncontaminated environment of the early universe, This cooling mechanism is incredibly delicate. There are no heavy elements, no carbon or oxygen dust grains to radiate the heat away, as there are in the star-forming nebulae of our modern Milky Way. The early universe contains only hydrogen, helium, and the faintest trace of lithium. The salvation of the cosmos relies on a rare and subtle chemical bond. Deep within the darkening, compressing clouds, two independent hydrogen atoms occasionally collide with precisely the right trajectory and energy to bind together, forging a single molecule of molecular hydrogen. This molecule, consisting of two protons and two electrons, possesses a unique quantum mechanical property. When the molecular hydrogen collides with other atoms in the warming gas, the kinetic energy of the impact causes the molecule to vibrate and rotate. As the molecule naturally relaxes back into its resting state, it releases that stored energy in the form of a low-frequency infrared photon. Visible infrared light simply escapes the cloud, traveling out into the endless void, carrying a microscopic fraction of the heat away with it. Billions upon billions of these tiny, invisible exhalations occur every second. The molecular hydrogen acts as a highly efficient cosmic coolant, slowly and methodically draining the thermal resistance from the core of the cloud. Stripped of its thermal armor, the gas cloud succumbs entirely to the crushing weight of its own accumulating mass. The slow accumulation accelerates into a catastrophic freefall collapse. Millions of solar masses of hydrogen plunge inward toward a central point. The density skyrockets. The ambient temperature, which had been artificially suppressed by the molecular cooling, finally overwhelms the mechanism. The heat spikes violently, rising from a few hundred degrees to thousands, and then to millions of degrees Kelvin. The gas is instantly ionized. The electrons torn violently away from the protons once again, reverting the core into a dense, blindingly bright plasma. Deep within the absolute center of this collapsing maelstrom, hidden behind light years of thick, falling gas, a prototser is born. It is a massive, turning sphere of superheated plasma, glowing fiercely in the infrared, yet still lacking the internal pressure to fully halt the gravitational crush. The weight of the surrounding universe continues to press down upon it. The core compresses further. The density reaches millions of kilograms per cubic meter. A fundamental threshold is crossed. The internal temperature of the prototser strikes roughly 15 million degrees Kelvin. At this extreme thermal limit, the protons within the core are moving with such terrifying kinetic velocity that they can overcome their natural electrostatic repulsion. Through a phenomenon known as quantum tunneling, the protons physically merge. The strong nuclear force snaps them together, and the process of sustained nuclear fusion finally ignites. A microscopic fraction of the mass involved in this fusion is converted directly into pure, unadulterated energy, following the precise mathematical dictations of mass energy equivalence. This explosive energy radiates outward from the core, slamming into the crushing weight of the collapsing gas. The outward pressure of the nuclear furnace perfectly meets the inward crush of gravity. The collapse abruptly halts. A state of absolute, perfect hypostatica. Equilibrium is achieved. The dark ages of the universe officially shatter. The cosmic dawn has broken. A blinding, searing point of pure blue-white light pierces the ancient, unbroken dark. The first photon of visible light to exist in hundreds of millions of years travels outward, carrying the triumphant signature of nuclear fire. This is not a star like our sun. The stellar bodies that populate our night sky today are relatively small-measured, unstable, carefully regulated by the heavy metallic elements resting in their cores. But this first star, forged entirely from pristine, uncontaminated hydrogen and helium, is an absolute leviathan. Astrophysicists designate these primordial giants as population II stars. They are monsters of the early cosmos, weighing hundreds, perhaps thousands of times more than our sun, without the heavy elements to regulate their internal thermodynamics. These stars must burn with an incomprehensible, terrifying ferocity simply to hold up their own massive, crushing weight. They are brilliant, violent, and incredibly short-lived. Where a yellow dwarf like our sun might peacefully burn for 10 billion years, a massive population II star will exhaust its nuclear fuel in mere 1 or 2 million years, a fleeting, microscopic blink in the vast span of cosmic time. But during their brief, violent lives, they are the undisputed monarchs of the newly illuminated void. Their surface temperatures exceed 100,000 degrees, radiating an intense, blinding luminosity millions of times greater than the star that warms the Earth today. And then thousands of these massive population II stars ignite within the dense dark matter halos. The architecture of the universe fundamentally changes. The light from these primordial leviathans is not merely a beacon in the dark. It is a weapon of profound subatomic destruction. Because these stars are so incredibly hot, the vast majority of the light they emit is not in the visible spectrum. It is extremely high energy, lethal ultraviolet radiation. As this intense barrage of ultraviolet photons streams outward from the newly ignited stars, it slams violently into the surrounding ocean of cold, neutral hydrogen gas that has filled the universe since the Great Release. When a high-energy ultraviolet photon strikes a neutral hydrogen atom, the impact is catastrophic. The photon transfers its immense energy directly to the orbiting electron. The electron, suddenly infused with overwhelming kinetic velocity, is violently ejected from its stable quantum orbit. It is torn away from the proton, cast out into the void. The stable, neutral atom is instantly shattered, reverting back into an electrically charged ion. This process is the exact, mirrored opposite of the era of recombination. The universe is being systematically torn apart by its own new light. Astrophysicists refer to this violent, transformative epoch as the era of reionization. Around every single newly born star, a massive, expanding sphere of highly agitated, ionized plasma begins to grow. These are bubbles of extreme radiation, carving their way through the ancient, cold fog of the Dark Ages. Inside the bubbles, the gas is superheated, glowing with the frantic energy of free roaming protons and electrons. Outside the bubbles, the universe remains a cold, dark, and neutral ocean. Slowly, methodically, over the course of the next several 100 million years, the number of stars in the universe multiplies exponentially. The dark matter halos merge, drawing the early stars together into small, chaotic, and violently bright clusters, the very first proto-galaxies. The expanding bubbles of ionized plasma begin to overlap. They intersect and merge, carving vast, glowing tunnels through the neutral hydrogen. The ultraviolet light eats away at the primordial fog, dissolving the darkness like acid poured over a vast, black canvas. The universe is undergoing a magnificent, violent awakening. The absolute, uniform stillness of the early dark is being replaced by a highly complex, dynamic, unstructured environment. The cosmic web, once merely an invisible blueprint drawn by dark matter and ancient sound waves, is finally being illuminated. The threads of the web are burning with the bright, blue-white fire of the massive population III stars. Yet, for all their blinding brilliance and their destructive power, the most important contribution of these primordial leviathans is not their light. It is their internal chemistry. Deep within the crushing, superheated cores of these massive stars, a new cosmic forge has been violently activated. The early universe provided only hydrogen and helium. But inside the belly of these giant stars, the intense pressure and the millions of degrees of heat are forcing heavier and heavier elements into existence. Helium is fusing into carbon. Carbon is fusing into oxygen. Neon, silicon, and sulfur are being hammered out in a delicate, layered structure deep within the stellar core. The absolute baseline ingredients for rocky planets, for liquid water, and for complex biological life are finally, quietly being manufactured in the dark heart of the cosmic dawn. These massive stars are the crucibles of complexity. They are holding within themselves the heavy, metallic future of the entire cosmos. But the laws of physics dictate that this newly forged wealth cannot remain locked away forever. The violent, fast-burning nature of the population II stars ensures that their end will be just as dramatic and consequential as their birth. The hydrostatic equilibrium that holds them together is incredibly fragile. They are burning through their nuclear fuel at a terrifying, unsustainable rate. As the hydrogen in their cores is exhausted, the outward pressure will begin to falter. The patient, eternal architect of the universe, will instantly resume its inward crush. Blinding era of the very first stars is quietly preparing for a catastrophic conclusion. The universe is about to witness the most violent localized events in the history of reality. Events that will permanently seed the expanding void with the heavy elements of life. We are approaching the era of the great detonations, the era of the supernova, where the silence of the ancient void will be shattered by the thunderous deaths of the original Leviathaness. The life of a primordial Leviathan is an exercise in profound and violent physics, or continuous, raging battle against the inexorable crush of its own immense gravity. The first stars, the population II giants forged in the immediate aftermath of the cosmic dark ages, possess no heavy elements to regulate their internal combustion. They are massive, unstable, and ravenous. To maintain the delicate state of hypnotic equilibrium, they must consume their core reserves of hydrogen at a terrifying, accelerated pace. What a stable, yellow dwarf star might burn over the course of 10 billion years. These absolute monsters exhaust in a mere fraction of a cosmic blink, burning furiously for perhaps 2 to 3 million years before approaching a catastrophic failure. Deep within the core of such a star, the immense pressure and heat have established a layered, complex nuclear fort. As the primary fuel of hydrogen is exhausted, the core contracts, driving the temperature even higher. This spike in thermal energy initiates the fusion of helium into carbon. When the helium is depleted, the core contracts again, igniting the carbon to forge oxygen, then neon, then silicon. The interior of the star begins to resemble an enormous, superheated onion, with distinct, concentric layers of increasingly heavy elements burning simultaneously around the absolute center. The star is a factory of chemical complexity, silently manufacturing the building blocks of the future universe in the dark, crushing depths of its own gravity. But this process of nucleosynthesis is strictly governed by the unyielding laws of thermodynamics. Each successive stage of fusion yields less outward energy and burns for a significantly shorter duration. The carbon burning phase may last for a few hundred years. The silicon burning phase, the final frantic effort of the dying star, may last for only a matter of days. The sequence reaches a terminal, insurmountable barrier. The core begins to fuse silicon into iron. Iron is the atomic anvil of the universe. It possesses the most tightly bound nucleus of all the elements. The fusion of elements lighter than iron releases immense energy, providing the outward pressure necessary to support the star. However, the fusion of iron absorbs energy. It is an endothermic reaction. The moment the core transitions to iron, The nuclear furnace that has held the crushing weight of the star at bay for millions of years is instantly and permanently extinguished. The outward pressure simply vanishes. The eternal battle is lost. The silent, patient architect of the cosmos immediately claims its total victory in a fraction of a second. The iron core, which may possess a mass greater than our entire sun, violently collapses inward upon itself. The collapse occurs at a significant percentage of the speed of light. The protons and electrons within the core are subjected to such incomprehensible physical pressure that they are violently crushed together, merging to form a dense, uniform sphere of pure neutrons. Equal the size of the Earth is compressed into a perfectly smooth, hyperdense sphere measuring roughly 20 kilometers across. It is a state of matter so extreme that a single teaspoon of this material would weigh billions of tons. The outer layers of the star, suddenly deprived of their underlying support, rush inward toward the shrinking core in a catastrophic freefall. Millions of Earth masses of superheated plasma plummet downward at a fraction of the speed of light. However, when this falling matter strikes the newly formed, hyperdense neutron core, it encounters an immovable, impenetrable surface. The infalling material violently bounces off the core, generating an outward moving shockwave of unimaginable, terrifying power. This mechanical rebound is further energized by a blinding, incomprehensible flood of neutrinos. During the split-second collapse, the merging of protons and electrons releases a burst of these ghostly particles so intense that it carries away nearly 99% of the total gravitational binding energy of the star. For a brief, microscopic instant, the core of this single dying star emits more energy than the rest of the observable universe combined. This neutrino flood slams into the dense, rebounding shockwave, super-K-graph it, driving it outward through the outer layers of the star with unstoppable, devastating force. The star detonates. This is the supernova, the most violent and energetic localized event in the physical universe. The explosion instantly tears the massive star apart, completely obliterating its physical structure. The outer layers, containing the freshly forged carbon, oxygen, neon, and silicon, are violently expelled into the surrounding interstellar void at speeds exceeding 30,000 kilometers per second. The sheer kinetic energy and heat of the shockwave are so extreme that they force a final, chaotic wave of rapid nuclear fusion. In the brief, blinding flash of the detonation, the extreme conditions force atoms together to create elements far heavier than iron. Gold, platinum, uranium, and iodine are forged in the chaotic, high-energy crossfire of the expanding shockwave for a period of several weeks. The light from this single, dying star is so overwhelmingly intense that it can easily outshine the combined luminosity of an entire nascent galaxy. It is a brilliant, blinding beacon in the deep dark, a violent and spectacular conclusion to the first generation of stars. Yet, this spectacular death is entirely necessary for the advancement of the cosmos. The supernova is not merely a destructive event. It is an act of profound cosmic fertilization. The metallic ash forged in the heart of the Leviathan and the chaotic rim of its explosion are scattered deep into the cold, pristine clouds of neutral hydrogen gas that still fill the vast majority of the universe. Known to astrophysicists as cosmic enrichment, fundamentally alters the chemistry of the void. The interstellar medium is no longer a pure, sterile mixture of hydrogen and helium. It is now laced with the microscopic dust of carbon, oxygen, and iron. This is the stardust, the heavy, complex ash that forms the absolute prerequisite for the physical world as we understand it. The iron that currently flows through the hemoglobin of your blood, the calcium that forms the rigid structure of your bones, and the carbon that serves as the foundation for every organic molecule in your body were all forged in the crushing heart of a population II star, and violently expelled into the void by a primordial supernova. We are the conscious, self-assembling residue of these ancient detonations. As the shockwaves from these thousands of early supernova expand outward, they act as massive, interstellar plows. They crash into the cold, drifting clouds of hydrogen gas, compressing them, forcing the atoms closer together. This mechanical compression triggers a vast, secondary wave of gravitational collapse. The universe prepares to birth its second generation of stars. However, because the gas clouds have been permanently enriched by the metallic dust of the first supernova, the physics of this new star formation are fundamentally different. The heavy elements, particularly carbon and oxygen, act as incredibly efficient thermal coolants. As the new gas clouds collapse and begin to heat up through friction, the microscopic dust grains absorb this thermal energy and radiate it away into space as infrared light. Because the clouds can cool themselves far more efficiently than the pure hydrogen of the early dark ages, they do not need to accumulate millions of solar masses to initiate a collapse. The cooling gas is able to fragment into much smaller, denser pockets. Instead of forging a single, massive leviathan, the collapsing cloud breaks apart, giving birth to hundreds or thousands of smaller, more measured stellar bodies. This is the emergence of the population II stars. They are significantly smaller, cooler, and far more stable than their violent predecessors. While a population II giant might exhaust itself in a few million years, these smaller, metal-enriched stars burn their hydrogen fuel with a slow, measured efficiency. They are the yellow and red dwarfs, stars capable of persisting for tens of billions of years in a state of quiet, stable equilibrium. They are the enduring, patient lights of the cosmos, the long-lasting furnaces that will eventually anchor the vast, complex planetary systems of the future. The universe has successfully transitioned from a frantic, fast-burning era of fleeting giants to a mature, enduring state of stable illumination. As these new, longer-lived stars ignite by the millions, the underlying architecture of the universe continues to evolve. The vast invisible halos of dark matter, which have been steadily guiding the flow of gas and stars since the end of the Dark Ages, begin to interact on a massive scale. The fundamental force of gravity reaches across the expanding voids, pulling the dark matter structures toward one another. The halos collide and merge, forming increasingly massive gravitational wells. As the invisible scaffolding combines, it drags the glowing, newly formed clusters of population II stars along with it. The universe is undergoing the profound, chaotic process of hierarchical assembly. Small, chaotic groupings of stars and gas are pulled relentlessly together, smashing into one another to form larger, more complex structures. These early collections of stars are the very first proto-galaxies. They do not possess the elegant, majestic spiral arms or the calm, orderly rotation of the mature galaxies we observe in our modern night sky. They are chaotic, irregular, and violently active environments. They are amorphous blobs of gas, dust, and brilliant blue star-forming regions, constantly distorted and torn apart by the intense tidal forces of near misses and direct collisions with their galactic neighbors. The early universe is a crowded, violent theater. The physical volume of space is significantly smaller than it is today, meaning these early galaxies are packed closely together. Collisions are frequent, catastrophic. When two of these massive, irregular galaxies intersect, the stars themselves rarely collide, as the vast empty distances between them render direct physical impact highly improbable. Instead, It is the vast clouds of interstellar gas that slam together. These galactic collisions send massive, galaxy-wide shockwaves ripping through the compressed gas clouds, triggering sudden, explosive bursts of star formation. The merging galaxies light up with the brilliant, blue-white fire of millions of newly born stars, their chaotic shapes glowing intensely against the dark background of the expanding universe. Yet deep within the centers of these merging galaxies, the gravitational environment becomes unimaginably extreme. The collisions funnel vast quantities of gas and dust directly into the absolute core of the new, larger galaxy. This dense concentration of matter feeds the growth of supermassive black holes. These are gravity sinks of incomprehensible mass, millions or even billions of times more massive than our Sun, resting silently in the center of the galactic chaos. As the funneled gas falls toward the event horizon of the supermassive black hole, it forms a massive, swirling accretion disk. The friction within this disk heats the gas to billions of degrees, causing it to glow with an intensity that can easily outshine the rest of the entire galaxy combined. These active galactic nuclei, or quasars, are the brightest continuous objects in the known universe, projecting massive jets of high-energy radiation thousands of light-years out into the deep void. They are the violent, hungry engines of the early cosmos, regulating the growth of the galaxies around them. The assembly of galaxies is a slow, methodical process that spans billions of years. It is a heavy, rhythmic cycle of attraction, collision, and merging. The small, irregular clumps of stars gradually combine to form larger, more massive elliptical structures. The chaotic orbits of the stars slowly begin to align, and the foundation for the ground, rotating spiral disks of the future is quietly laid. The universe is no longer a uniform, expanding cloud of pure gas, nor is it merely a scattering of isolated, burning leviathans. It has transformed into a vast, stretching web of complex, interacting islands of light. The ancient dark has been systematically pushed back, replaced by a dynamic, structured environment of immense scale and breathtaking beauty. The raw materials have been forged, the heavy elements have been scattered, and the stable, long-lasting stars have taken their positions within the growing galactic cities. The universe has successfully built the stage, set the lighting, and established the complex chemistry required for the next great era of evolution. We are moving steadily toward the era of planetary accretion, where the cold, metallic dust surrounding these stable new stars will begin its slow, silent dance of gravity, pulling together in the dark to form the solid physical worlds of the modern cosmos. Chunk 7. The swirling dust and the birth of worlds. The grand architecture of the early universe has been successfully established. The vast, stretching voids of deep space are now illuminated by the steady, rotating fires of mature galaxies. A violent epoch of the primordial leviathans, the massive population III stars, has drawn to a permanent close, leaving behind a cosmos fundamentally altered by their spectacular deaths. The once sterile ocean of pure hydrogen and helium is now heavily laced with the complex, metallic ash of a trillion ancient supernova. The universe is rich with the raw, heavy materials required for solid structure. It is within this chemically enriched environment, resting deep within the quiet, outer spiral arms of a mature galaxy, that the next profound phase of physical evolution begins to slowly unfold. We shift our focus away from the macroscopic collisions of entire galaxies, narrowing our observation down to a single, localized region of the interstellar medium. Imagine a vast, cold, and profoundly dark expanse of space, spanning perhaps 50 light-years across. This is a molecular cloud, dense, drifting stellar nursery. It is a quiet, freezing environment where the ambient temperature hovers just a few degrees above absolute zero. Within this cloud, the hydrogen gas is thick enough to shield its interior from the harsh, degrading ultraviolet radiation of nearby stars. Suspended within this cold, protective dark is the microscopic residue of the ancient detonations. It is a fine, invisible mist of carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, silicon, undione. These are the heavy elements, the fundamental building blocks of rock, ice, and organic chemistry, waiting patiently in the deep freeze of the galactic arm. For millions of years, this cloud drifts in a state of delicate, undisturbed equilibrium, a vast, floating reservoir of structural potential. But the environment of a rotating galaxy is inherently dynamic. The delicate equilibrium of the molecular cloud is eventually disturbed. Perhaps it is the physical pressure of a distant supernova shockwave washing over the cloud, or perhaps it is the subtle gravitational tide of a passing star cluster. Whatever the precise catalyst, a localized region of the cloud is compressed, just enough to upset the balance between its internal thermal pressure and the inward pull of its own gravity. The threshold is crossed. The cloud begins a slow, inexorable collapse inward upon itself, as the thousands of solar masses of gas and dust fall toward their common center of gravity. A fundamental law of physics begins to dictate the geometry of the new system, the conservation of angular momentum. In the vast, open space of the universe, nothing is perfectly still. The original molecular cloud possessed a microscopic, almost imperceptible rotation. As the cloud collapses and shrinks, this rotation is violently amplified, much like a figure skater pulling their arms inward to spin faster. The collapsing cloud begins to rotate with increasing, terrifying speed. The sheer centrifugal force of this rapid rotation begins to fight against the inward crush of gravity. Along the axis of rotation, the gas and dust fall freely toward the center. But along the equator, the outward centrifugal force prevents the material from collapsing directly inward. As a result, the roughly spherical cloud is systematically flattened. It is pressed out into a vast, swirling, highly active structure known as a protoplanetary disk. At the absolute center of this swirling disk, where the vast majority of the mass has successfully accumulated, the density and temperature are rising exponentially. The friction of the infalling gas creates a profound, localized heat. A massive, glowing sphere of highly pressurized plasma forms in the deep center. This is the protozoa, the infant sun. It is immensely hot, radiating heavily in the infrared spectrum. But its core has not yet reached the critical temperature required to ignite sustained nuclear fusion. It is a dark, brooding furnace, gathering its final mass from the inner edges of the swirling disk. Surrounding this central protozoa, the protoplanetary disk extends outward for billions of kilometers. It is a chaotic, turbulent environment, a thick, opaque soup of swirling hydrogen gas and metallic dust. But this disk is not uniform. A profound temperature gradient exists across its vast diameter. Near the glowing central protozoa, the ambient environment is searingly hot. Only the heaviest, most resilient materials, the metals and the rocky silicates, can exist in a solid state within this inner region. Any volatile compounds, such as water, ammonia, and methane, are instantly vaporized by the intense heat, existing only as formless, invisible gas. As you move further out through the disk, away from the central furnace, the temperature steadily drops. At equal distance from the protozoa, the ambient temperature falls below the freezing point of water in a vacuum. This invisible boundary is known to astrophysicists as the frost line. It is a permanent, structural division in the architecture of the developing solar system, Beyond the frost line, the vast quantities of volatile gases are able to condense and freeze, forming microscopic, solid grains of ice. This thermal division directly dictates the entire future of the planetary system. Within the hot, inner region of the disk, where only metals and rocks can survive as solids, the raw material for planet building is relatively scarce. The heavy elements make up only a tiny fraction of the total mass of the original cloud. Consequently, the planets that form in this inner zone will be small, incredibly dense, and made entirely of rock and iron. But how do microscopic grains of silicon and iron floating in a vacuum eventually become massive, solid worlds? The process is a slow, agonizingly patient exercise in geometric accumulation, a mechanism known as accretion. It begins at the absolute microscopic level. As the tiny dust grains swirl through the hot inner disk, they occasionally bump into one another in the sterile vacuum of space. These physical impacts do not simply bounce apart. Electrostatic forces, the subtle, molecular stickiness of the universe, allow these microscopic shards of metal and rock to bind together upon contact. Dust grains merge to become tiny clumps. These clumps collide and fuse to form small pebbles. Driven by the chaotic currents of the swirling gas, crash together to form larger, jagged rocks. It is a silent, airless process of continual, tumbling collisions. There is no sound in this vacuum, only the slow, relentless accumulation of mass. Over the course of hundreds of thousands of years, these rocks grow into massive, misshapen boulders, and eventually into objects several kilometers across. These are the planetcements, the primitive, violent building blocks of the inner solar system. They are not elegant spheres, but brutal, jagged amalgams of scarred rock and heavy metal. As these planetcements grow larger, their own gravitational fields begin to assert dominance over the surrounding disk. They are no longer merely drifting on the currents of the gas. They are actively reaching out, using their gravity to pull in surrounding rocks and dust. The accretion process accelerates. The planetcements crash into one another in catastrophic, high-velocity collisions. The kinetic energy of these massive impacts is instantly converted into heat, melting the rock and forging larger, highly pressurized bodies. Through this violent, chaotic process of destruction and accumulation, the thousands of planetcements are slowly consolidated into a handful of planetary embryos, the fiery, molten precursors to the terrestrial planet. Meanwhile, a fundamentally different process is occurring in the deep, freezing expanse beyond the frost line. In the outer regions of the swirling disk, solid matter is incredibly abundant. The microscopic grains of rock and metal are vastly outnumbered by the immense quantities of solid, frozen water, ammonia, and methane ice. Because there is so much more solid material available, the planetcements that form in the outer disk grow much larger and much faster. These outer planetcements quickly accumulate enough ice and rock to form massive, solid cores weighing perhaps 10 times the mass of the entire Earth. At this immense, critical mass, their gravitational pull becomes overwhelmingly powerful. They cross a threshold where they are no longer just sweeping up solid ice and rock. They begin to actively pull in the vast, surrounding ocean of primordial hydrogen and helium gas. This initiates a phase of runaway gas accretion. The massive ice cores drag in millions of cubic kilometers of gas, building unimaginably thick, crushing atmospheres. These are the Jovian planets, the gas giants. They are absolute leviathan-ness of the outer system, composed mostly of the exact same hydrogen and helium that makes up the central star, wrapped around a deep, crushing core of exotic ice and liquid metal. Their sheer mass allows them to act as gravitational shepherds, dominating the outer disk, clearing vast, empty lanes through the swirling dust, and dictating the orbital mechanics of the entire system. As the planets, both the small rocky worlds of the inner system and the massive gas giants of the outer system, continue to carve their paths through the disk, the central protoxer finally reaches its absolute physical limit. The crushing pressure in its core drives the temperature past 15 million degrees. The strong nuclear force takes over. Protons fuse. The dark, brooding furnace instantly ignites with the blinding, sustained fire of true nuclear fusion. Our sun is officially born. The ignition of the central star sends a profound, violent shockwave through the entire system. This is the T-Tauri phase, a period characterized by an intense, ferocious solar wind. The newly born star projects a massive, high-velocity stream of charged particles and intense ultraviolet radiation outward into the disk. This solar wind acts as a colossal, cosmic broom. It slams into the remaining, unaccreted hydrogen gas and microscopic dust that still fills the spaces between the newly formed planets. The relentless pressure of the solar wind physically sweeps this loose material outward, driving it out of the solar system and back into the interstellar medium. The thick, opaque fog of the protoplanetary disk is violently, unsystematically cleared away. The planetary growth phase abruptly ends. Without the surrounding gas and dust to feed upon, the planets can no longer grow. Their final masses and rough compositions are permanently locked into place. The solar system transitions from a chaotic, opaque cloud of swirling debris into a clear, transparent theater of distinct, separated worlds orbiting a blinding, yellow-white star. However, the clearing of the gas does not mean the system is completely peaceful. The early solar system is a profoundly hostile and chaotic environment. While the massive gas giants have established relative stability in the deep outer cold, the inner system remains littered with millions of leftover planetsiments, jagged asteroids, and erratic comets that were not absorbed during the primary accretion phase. This initiates an agonizing, prolonged era known as the Late Heavy Bombardment. The newly forged terrestrial planets, still glowing with the residual heat of their own violent formation, are subjected to an unrelenting, catastrophic rain of rock and ice. Massacring hundreds of kilometers across, slam continuously into the thin, cooling crusts of the inner worlds. The impacts are so frequent and so violent that they repeatedly shatter the solidifying surfaces, turning the terrestrial planets into roiling, molten oceans of liquid magma. For hundreds of millions of years, this brutal, concussive reshaping continues. The gravity of the inner planets slowly, methodically sweeps their orbital paths clear, absorbing the stray debris through catastrophic impacts. It is a period of intense trauma, unnecessary, violent pruning of the remaining debris. Slowly, the frequency of the impacts begins to wane. The rogue planetsiments are either absorbed, pulverized, or flung out of the inner system by the complex gravitational interactions of the larger bodies. The orbits of the terrestrial planets slowly begin to stabilize, settling into the calm, predictable ellipses dictated by the laws of celestial mechanics. Molten surfaces of these small, dense worlds begin to cool, radiating their immense heat out into the newly cleared, freezing vacuum of space. Thin, primitive crusts of solid dark abyss will begin to form over the oceans of magma. We have successfully navigated the chaotic, swirling dust of the solar nebula. We have witnessed the segregation of the elements, the violent birth of the gas giants, and the fiery, traumatic assembly of the inner rocky worlds. The architecture of a mature solar system is now in place. We will now narrow our focus even further, moving away from the grand mechanics of the entire system, to observe the specific, highly localized evolution of the third rock from the newly ignited sun, we are preparing to witness the slow, agonizing, and ultimately miraculous geological settling of the early Earth. The fiery crucible that will eventually cool to support the profound complexity of liquid oceans and the first fragile stirrings of biological chemistry. The third planet from the newly ignited sun is not a world of deep blue oceans or green continents. In its earliest infancy, roughly 4.6 billion years ago, the Earth is a vision of absolute, unyielding hostility. Geologists refer to this initial, violent epoch as the Hadean. It is a world composed entirely of roiling liquid rock, the kinetic energy of billions of violent impacts during the planetary accretion phase, combined with the intense, localized radioactive decay of short-lived isotopes trapped within the rock, has melted the entire planetary mass. It is a deep, glowing, orange sphere of churning magma, suspended in the freezing vacuum of space. There is no solid surface to stand upon. The ambient temperature of the thin, temporary atmosphere sits at thousands of degrees. Deep within this molten sphere, a profound mechanical sorting process begins. This is planetary differentiation, a slow, inexorable settling governed purely by the laws of gravity and fluid density. The heaviest elements within the molten mix, primarily iron and nickel, begin to sink. They fall heavily through the lighter, viscous silicates of the magma ocean, drawn relentlessly toward the absolute center of the planet. This mass migration of heavy metals is known as the iron catastrophe. It is not a singular event, but a steady, global descent that spans millions of years. As billions of tons of liquid iron plunge toward the core, the sheer physical friction of their descent generates even more internal heat, keeping the planet fundamentally and entirely liquid. At the sinking, iron accumulates to form a massive, spinning core of liquid metal. The pressures here are incomprehensible to the human mind. The fluid dynamics of the spinning, superheated iron ocean generate powerful electrical currents deep within the planet. In turn, induce a massive, invisible magnetic field that reaches out far beyond the physical boundaries of the atmosphere. The magnetosphere is successfully born. At Akon to settle an invisible, protective shield, deflecting the harsh, stripping solar winds of the young sun, preserving the Earth's developing atmosphere from being blown away into the deep dark, hidden core of spinning iron. The Earth would eventually be stripped bare, becoming a barren, irradiated rock. But the architecture of the inner solar system is not yet fully settled. The orbital paths of the newly formed terrestrial planets are still chaotic, cluttered with massive, rogue protoplanets that somehow survived the initial gravitational clearing. Approximately 50 million years after the Earth first coalesces, it encounters one of these rogue bodies. This is the Ea, a Mars-sized planetary embryo, drifting slowly on a fatal, intersecting trajectory. The collision is not a glancing blow, but a profound, catastrophic impact of unimaginable proportions. Ea strikes the molten Earth at a staggering velocity. The sheer kinetic energy of the collision is sufficient to vaporize the entirety of the Ea and the significant, deep portion of the Earth's outer mantle. A massive, blinding shockwave ripples through the core of the Earth, nearly tearing the young planet completely apart. Millions of cubic kilometers of superheated rock, magma, and vaporized silica are violently ejected outward, thrown high into the surrounding space. For a brief, chaotic period, the Earth possesses a dense, glowing ring of vaporized rock and debris, not unlike the rings of modern Saturn, but burning with the fierce heat of 1,000 furnaces. However, the unyielding laws of gravity immediately begin to assert control over this chaotic ring. The debris begins to clump together, accreting in the exact same manner that the planets themselves formed from the solar nebula, in a remarkable display of cosmic efficiency, spanning perhaps only a few short decades. This ring of molten debris coalesces into a single large, spherical body. The moon is born. The newly formed moon is incredibly close to the Earth, resting perhaps only 20,000 kilometers away, looming massive and glowing dull red in the heavy sky. Its gravitational pull on the young Earth is immense. It drags the molten rock of the surface into massive, rolling tides of magma. But more importantly, the presence of the moon acts as a profound stabilizing anchor. Its gravitational influence firmly locks the Earth into a steady, measured axial tilt. This permanent tilt will eventually govern the rhythmic, predictable cycle of the seasons, preventing the wild, chaotic climatic swings that would otherwise render the surface completely uninhabitable. The supreme violence of the year was the ultimate catalyst for long-term planetary stability. Following the year impact, the Earth begins a long, agonizingly slow process of thermodynamic cooling. The residual heat of the accretion, the iron catastrophe, and the great collision must be steadily radiated away into the freezing vacuum of space. As the surface temperature begins to gradually fall, the vast, rolling ocean of magma slowly begins to congeal. Thin plates of solidness, all rock, begin to form on the surface, floating like jagged drafts on the churning liquid mantle below. The crust is thin, fragile, and constantly recycled, drawn back down into the molten depths by the violent convection currents of the interior. Yet, over tens of millions of years, the cooling persists, and the crust steadily thickens. The Earth finally acquires a permanent, solid shell. As the solid crust forms, locking the magma away, the immense pressure of the interior finds alternate pathways to the surface. Millions of deep fissures and massive, primitive volcanoes erupt continuously across the blackened, scarred globe. This is the era of global outgassing. They not merely spew lava, they exhale vast, unimaginable quantities of trapped gases that were locked securely inside the rock during the planet's formation. Immense, towering plumes of carbon dioxide, nitrogen, methane, ammonia, and water vapor are driven up into the developing sky. These heavy gases accumulate, held tightly against the planet by the unrelenting force of gravity, forming the Earth's second atmosphere. It is a thick, crushing, and highly toxic envelope. The sky is not the pale, comforting blue we know today, but a heavy, oppressive, and smog-choked orange. The atmospheric pressure is dozens of times greater than the modern era. The thick concentration of carbon dioxide acts as a severe greenhouse gas, permanently trapping the residual heat of the planet in the faint, weak light of the young sun. The world is a dark, suffocating hothouse, completely devoid of free oxygen, a desolate landscape of black, jagged rock beneath a heavy, toxic canopy. Within this thick, noxious atmosphere, the vast quantities of water vapor continuously expelled by the volcanoes begin to slowly accumulate. As the Earth continues its slow, methodical cooling process, the temperature of the upper atmosphere finally drops below a critical threshold. The water vapor, which has been suspended in the crushing heat for millions of years, begins to systematically condense. It forms massive, global systems of heavy, dark clouds. The sky grows entirely black, blocking out the faint sun completely. The great deluge begins. As the surface temperature of the cooling crust slips just below the boiling point of water, the very first drops of liquid rain begin to fall. Because the atmosphere is so incredibly thick and heavily pressurized, water can exist in a liquid state at temperatures well above what we would consider boiling today. The rain hits the searing hot, black basalt of the crust and instantly flashes back into steam, rising up violently to join the heavy clouds once more. It is a violent, churning cycle of rapid boiling and condensation. But the cooling of the planet is an inexorable mechanical truth. The crust continues to lose heat, and the cycle of immediate evaporation slows. The rain begins to accumulate on the solid ground. It is not a gentle shower, but a torrential, unrelenting downpour of highly acidic, pressurized water that falls continuously for perhaps millions of years. The water flows heavily over the jagged, barren rocks, carving the very first physical channels and canyons into the crust. It pours in the deep, impact-scarred basins left behind by the late heavy bombardment. It actively strips the atmosphere of its heavy load of carbon dioxide, washing the greenhouse gases down into the newly forming seas. The great rain continues until the heavy, choking skies are largely cleared, and the vast majority of the atmospheric water has been transferred permanently to the surface. The global oceans are formed. They are not the deep, clear, blue oceans of the modern world. The primordial ocean is profoundly hot, perhaps resting at 80 or 90 degrees Celsius. It is highly acidic and heavily saturated with dissolved iron and heavy metals stripped from the crust, rendering the vast water a deep, dark olive green. The sky above is a lighter, hazy orange, slowly clearing as the relentless rain washes the ancient ash and dust away. The earth has smoothly transitioned from a sphere of roiling magma into a true, pressurized water world. Beneath the surface of this vast, green ocean, the geological mechanics of the earth continue to operate in the dark. The crust is cracked and deeply fractured by the relentless tectonic shifting of the hot mantle below. Heavy seawater seeps down into these deep fissures, reaching miles beneath the ocean floor, where it comes into direct physical contact with the superheated magma chambers. The water is instantly superheated, heavily pressurized, and infused with a massive concentration of dissolved minerals, sulfides, and metallic ions from the surrounding bedrock. Driven by the intense, deep heat, this mineral-rich fluid surges back up through the crust, erupting violently from the ocean floor. These are the hydrothermal vents, towering jagged chimneys of precipitated rock that continuously spew black, scalding water into the deep dark ocean. It is here, in the absolute pitch-black depths of the primordial sea, far removed from the harsh, destructive ultraviolet radiation of the young sun, that the fundamental chemistry of the earth begins to permanently shift. The environment around these deep sea vents is a churning cauldron of extreme thermodynamic gradients. There is an intense, constant physical clash between the superheated, highly alkaline fluid erupting from the crust and the cooler, heavy, acidic water of the deep ocean. This precise physical interface creates a natural, continuous chemical battery. The microscopic, honeycomb-like pores within the rocky chimneys trap the complex, carbon-based molecules that were either delivered to the oceans by ancient comet impacts or synthesized in the toxic atmosphere above. The immense thermodynamic energy of the vents provides the driving force, a continuous, unrelenting source of natural chemical power. Within these tiny, rocky chambers, a profound, invisible transition begins to slowly unfold. The basic, inert molecules of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen are forced together by the intense pressure and heat, break apart, and recombine in a blind, relentless lottery of chemical evolution. Simple amino acids are successfully forged in the dark. Chains of complex lipids begin to naturally self-assemble, folding into microscopic spherical membranes. The strict, unyielding line between radiochemistry and the very first stages of biochemistry begins to profoundly blur. The Volscians are no longer merely stagnant bodies of hot water, They have transformed into a vast, global laboratory, a churning primordial soup of increasing molecular complexity. The Earth has finally settled from its fiery, chaotic birth. The structural foundations are permanently laid. The magnetic shield holds the atmosphere tightly in place. The moon anchors the seasons. The global oceans provide the perfect fluid medium, and the deep hydrothermal vents provide the limitless energy. The long, brutal epoch of purely physical and geological mechanics is gently drawing to a close. The stage is perfectly set in the deep, warm dark of the olive-green seas for the most astonishing and complex phenomenon in the history of the universe. The silent, invisible threshold of life is finally about to be crossed. The transition from complex geochemistry to the very first stages of true biology is not marked by a sudden, dramatic spark. There is no singular, triumphant moment of awakening. It is, instead, a slow, blurry, and inexorable sliding across a profound threshold, occurring in the absolute pitch-black depths of the primordial ocean. We are focused on the microscopic, rocky pores of the deep-sea hydrothermal vents. Within these tiny, pressurized chambers, a relentless, blind lottery of chemical combination has been running continuously for millions of years. The raw heat of the Earth's mantle provides the endless thermodynamic energy, and the heavy, mineral-rich seawater provides the endless material, eventually sheer mathematical probability of deep time. A specific sequence of complex organic molecules aligns in a highly unusual configuration. It is a long, fragile chain of nucleic acids, a primitive precursor to the RNA molecule. This specific sequence possesses a profound, novel mechanical property. It does not simply break apart or react with its environment. It acts as a physical template. It binds with free-floating nucleotides in the surrounding fluid, passively organizing them into a mirrored copy of itself. The molecule has achieved the absolute baseline requirement of biological life. It has successfully executed the act of self-replication. This first replicator is not alive in the way we understand the concept today. It does not consume food. It does not move, and it possesses no consciousness. It is merely a complex, self-perpetuating chemical reaction, a microscopic loop of order emerging from the chaotic thermal gradients of the deep sea. But this simple loop changes the underlying mechanics of the Earth forever. The replicators copy themselves, and occasionally, the copying process is imperfect. These tiny, microscopic errors introduce variation. Most variations are unstable and quickly dissolve back into the hot seawater. But occasionally, an error confers a slight, mechanical advantage. The molecule copies itself slightly faster, or it binds more securely to the rocky walls of the deep-sea vent. The yielding engine of natural selection is quietly engaged. The more efficient replicas outpace the slower ones, gradually dominating the microscopic chambers. Over millions of years, these chemical systems become increasingly sophisticated. They begin to associate with naturally forming spheres of lipid molecules, primitive fatty bubbles that enclose the replicators, separating them from the chaotic, diluting ocean outside. These lipid membranes form the very first cell walls. The internal chemistry is now protected, isolated, and highly concentrated. This is the emergence of the true protocell. The Earth is now populated by the last universal common ancestor. Every biological organism that will ever exist on this planet, every redwood tree, every deep sea leviathan, every microscopic fungus, and every human being will trace its unbroken, continuous lineage directly back to this single, microscopic population of primitive cells huddled around a deep-sea vent in the dark, at the ocean. For over 1 billion years, life remains locked in this primitives, single-celled state. The Earth is a silent, microscopic theater. The oceans are teeming with vast, invisible populations of bacteria and archaea, slowly spreading out from the hydrothermal vents, adapting to the harsh, toxic environment of the early world. They consume dissolved sulfur and iron, surviving purely on the chemical energy provided by the planet itself. The surface of the world remains a barren, irradiated wasteland of dark rock beneath a heavy, toxic orange sky. But life is inherently expansive. A mutation arises in a specific lineage of bacteria residing in the shallow, sunlit waters of the ancient coastlines. This mutation involves a complex protein molecule capable of interacting with the electromagnetic radiation raining down from the young sun. This is the birth of chlorophyll. The known as singularity have unlocked the most profound energy source in the solar system. They begin to execute the process of photosynthesis. Instead of relying on the slow, limited chemical energy of the Earth's crust, they absorb the high-energy photons of the sun. They use this solar energy to mechanically shatter the molecular bonds of liquid water, absorbing the hydrogen to build their own cellular structures and discarding the oxygen as a completely useless, highly toxic waste product. This simple, microscopic process initiates the most devastating and transformative environmental catastrophe in the history of the planet. Oxygen is a highly reactive, volatile gas. For millions of years, the oxygen discarded by the singularity is immediately absorbed by the dissolved iron in the deep green oceans. The iron rusts, forming massive, heavy bands of solid iron oxide that sink to the ocean floor. The seas are slowly, methodically swept clear of their heavy metals, transitioning from their dark, primordial green to a deep, transparent blue. Once the vast oceans have completely rusted out, the oxygen has nowhere left to go. It begins to bubble up, out of the water, and into the heavy, carbon-rich atmosphere. This is the great oxidation event. The sudden influx of reactive oxygen is profoundly toxic to almost all the existing anaerobic life on Earth. A silent, microscopic mass extinction sweeps across the globe, wiping out the primitive organisms that cannot adapt to the newly corrosive environment. Simultaneously, the oxygen reacts with the thick methane in the upper atmosphere, breaking it down and drastically reducing the severe greenhouse effect that has kept the Earth warm. The planet undergoes a massive, sudden cooling. Immense, crushing sheets of glacial ice advance across the continents, but the singularity persists, relentlessly pumping oxygen into the sky. Dark orange haze of the primordial atmosphere is systematically oxidized, burned away by the rising gas. The atmosphere becomes clear. The sky slowly transitions into the pale, transparent blue we recognize today. High above the surface, a thin layer of ozone forms, acting as a permanent, planetary shield against the lethal ultraviolet radiation of the sun. The surface of the dry and is finally safe for biological habitation. With the oceans clearing to the atmosphere, rich in high-energy oxygen, the evolutionary engine shifts into a higher gear. The single-celled organisms begin to interact in complex, deeply symbiotic ways. One bacteria physically engulfs another, but instead of digesting it, the two cells form a permanent, internal partnership. The engulfed cell becomes the mitochondrion, the dedicated power plant of the new, highly efficient eukaryotic cell. These complex cells begin to cluster together, forming massive, cooperative colonies. They divide their labor, specializing in different tasks for the survival of the whole. True multicellular life is born. The microscopic simplicity of the early oceans gives way to an explosion of microscopic complexity. Sponges, worms, and soft-bodied organisms begin to filter through the shallow seas. The first nervous systems evolve. Primitive webs of electrochemical signals allowing these organisms to sense the world around them, to react, and to move with deliberate purpose. The vast span of deep time accelerates. Life crawls out of the oceans, dragging itself onto the barren, rocky continents. Plants develop rigid cellular walls of cellulose, reaching upward to capture the sunlight, slowly transforming the gray, desolate land masses into vast, sprawling carpets of deep green. The atmosphere continues to fill with oxygen. Lungs evolve from primitive swim bladders, allowing complex animals to draw the rich, invisible air directly into their bodies. Amphibians, reptiles, and eventually mammals rise and fall in a heavy, rhythmic cycle of adaptation and extinction. The continents drift across the face of the globe, riding the slow convective currents of the deep mantle, merging together and tearing apart, driving the relentless engine of evolutionary change. Dinosaurs rule the temperate, jungle-covered world for over 100 million years, only to be violently erased by the sudden, catastrophic impact of a massive asteroid, a brief, chaotic echo of the ancient, violent mechanics of the early solar system. In the quiet, cooling aftermath of this extinction, the small, warm, blooded mammals emerge from the shadows. They adapt, they grow, and they complexify in a specific lineage of primates, navigating the shifting, drying savannas of a single continent. The architecture of the brain undergoes a profound expansion. The cerebral cortex thickens, folding in upon itself to maximize its surface area within the strict, physical confines of the skull, built entirely from the heavy, metallic ash of the ancient population II supernova, powered by the oxygen manufactured by the microscopic Siaconocratia, and governed by the deep, underlying laws of quantum mechanics and thermodynamics, achieves something entirely unprecedented. It becomes self-aware. The universe, after 13.8 billion years of silent, blind, physical expansion, has finally evolved a mechanism to look back at itself. Consciousness is the ultimate profound complication of the cosmos. It is the universe waking up, opening its eyes, and attempting to comprehend its own vast, silent architecture. When you look up at the night sky, you are not a separate entity observing the universe from the outside. You are the universe. You are a localized, highly structured arrangement of ancient atoms, temporarily gathered together in a specific pattern, possessing the remarkable ability to reflect upon your own origins. The iron in your blood, which carries the oxygen to your brain, was forged in the dying, crushing heart of a star that detonated billions of years before the Earth was even a concept. The carbon that forms the structural backbone of your DNA was created in the superheated, expanding plasma of a primordial leviathan. The hydrogen in the water that makes up 70% of your physical body is the oldest substance in existence, formed in the blinding, high-energy crucible of the first 3 minutes following the absolute beginning. You are intimately, physically, and completely connected to the deep, silent history we have just traversed, resting in the quiet of the present moment. Allow the sheer scale of this reality to wash over you. The heavy, chaotic friction of your daily life, the localized stresses and anxieties of the modern world, are infinitesimally small when placed against the sprawling, majestic backdrop of deep time. Your existence is the improbable, beautiful result of a continuous, unbroken chain of physical events stretching back across unimaginable eons. The universe continues to expand. The galaxies continue their slow, silent rotation in the dark. The cosmic microwave background radiation continues to wash over the Earth, a freezing, invisible whisper from the edge of time. The grand mechanics of reality are operating exactly as they must, governed by the deep, unyielding laws of physics. There is nothing you need to do, no action you need to take to maintain this profound order. You are a part of the system, resting securely within the architecture of the cosmos. Let your awareness drift away from the complex biology of your own body, away from the specific, localized gravity of the Earth. Imagine your consciousness expanding outward, dissolving into the vast, silent void of interstellar space. The darkness between the stars is not empty, it is a heavy, comforting blanket of deep time and infinite potential. The cosmic clock continues to tick, but its rhythm is slow, patient, and eternal. The violent epochs of creation, the blinding flashes of the supernova, and the chaotic collisions of the early world are far behind us. The universe has settled into a state of mature, measured equilibrium. It is a place of profound peace, a vast, cooling theater of light and gravity. Allow the silence of this ancient void to settle deeply into your mind. The journey from the primal singularity to the present moment is complete. Unyielding laws of nature hold you safely in place. Breathe in the quiet expanse of the cosmos. Breathe out the lingering tension of the day. The universe is resting. And now, it is time for you to rest as well. Surrender to the slow, heavy gravity of sleep, knowing that you are made of starlight, anchored to a cooling world, drifting peacefully through the endless, beautiful dark. The journey of the cosmos does not end with the emergence of consciousness, nor does it pause for the temporary, fleeting structures of the present day. We have traveled 13.8 billion years forward from the absolute dawn, arriving at this specific, localized moment in the star life whose era, the age of starlight. It is an epoch defined by the bright, steady fusion of hydrogen within the cores of trillions of stars, casting warmth and illumination across the sprawling web of galaxies. Attainable timeline of reality. This era of light and biological complexity is merely a brief, brilliant flash. The forward arrow of time is absolute, driven by the unyielding thermodynamic law of entropy. The universe, having expanded and structured itself, must inevitably face its own slow, majestic, and permanent dissolution. As you rest in the quiet of your space, anchored to the slow rotation of the Earth, allow your mind to drift forward. We are going to accelerate the cosmic clock, moving beyond the present day, beyond the lifespan of the human species, and deep into the unimaginable future of the physical universe. In approximately 5 billion years, the steady yellow-white fire of our own sun will begin to falter. The deep reserves of hydrogen within its core will finally be exhausted. The delicate hypnotic equilibrium that has maintained the star for 10 billion years will collapse. The core will contract under the crush of gravity, heating violently and igniting the fusion of helium, while the outer layers of the star expand outward in a catastrophic, red-hot wave. The sun will transform into a red giant, swelling to consume the inner rocky planets. The oceans of the Earth will boil away, the atmosphere will be stripped, and the ancient, solid crust will melt back into a roiling sea of magma, returning the planet to the fiery state of its Hadiyai and birth. A dying sun will exhale its outer layers into the void, forming a vast, expanding cloud of illuminated gas known as a planetary nebula. All that will remain at the absolute center is the dense, dead core, a white dwarf. It is a sphere of super-compressed carbon and oxygen, roughly the size of the Earth, but containing half the mass of the original star. It will generate no new energy. It will simply sit in the dark, radiating its residual, ancient heat out into the freezing vacuum, cooling agonizingly slowly over hundreds of billions of years until it becomes a cold, black, and invisible sphere, a black dwarf. This slow, quiet demise is the ultimate fate of nearly all the stars currently burning in the night sky. Blue Leviathan S will detonate in violent supernova, leaving behind crushing neutron stars or bottomless black holes. The smaller, dwarfs, which make up the vast majority of the stellar population, will burn their fuel with extreme efficiency, lingering for trillions of years before finally, quietly fading to black. As the universal clock pushes past 100 trillion years, the stellar life whose era comes to a profound and permanent close. A last star in the cosmos exhausts its final reserves of nuclear fuel and blinks out. The great furnaces of creation are permanently extinguished. The universe plunges into a second, eternal dark age. We enter the degenerate era. The cosmos is now a vast, expanding graveyard of stellar remnants. Once majestic, swirling islands of light are now dark, invisible swarms of dead mass. Black dwarfs, neutron stars, and isolated brown dwarfs drift aimlessly through the frigid void, without the steady, outward pressure of starlight to push against the cold. The ambient temperature of the universe plummets to within a microscopic fraction of a degree above absolute zero. The physical volume of space continues to stretch, driven by the relentless, invisible force of dark energy. The expansion of the universe accelerates, tearing the galactic superclusters apart. Between the dead galaxies becomes so vast, and the space expands so rapidly, that light itself can no longer cross the gulfs. The universe becomes a collection of completely isolated, dark islands, forever cut off from one another. If consciousness were to exist in this era, it would look up into a completely empty, pitch-black sky, possessing no evidence that anything else exists beyond its own dead, localized gravity well. Within these isolated, dark galaxies, the silent mechanics of gravity continue their slow work. Over immense spans of time, the dead stellar remnants occasionally cross paths. Some are violently ejected from the galaxy entirely, flung out into the infinite, expanding emptiness. Others lose their orbital momentum and spiral inexorably inward, falling into the supermassive black holes that wait silently in the dead center of every former galaxy. These massive gravity sinks feed upon the dead stars, growing heavier and darker, dominating the surrounding space. But even the matter that avoids the black holes is not permanent. As we move incomprehensibly deep into the future, approaching 10 to the power of 40 years from the absolute beginning, the fundamental architecture of matter itself begins to slowly break down. Theoretical physics suggests that the proton, the heavy, stable anchor of the atomic nucleus, is not immortal, over unfathomable temescals. The concept of an absolute, final ending is a profoundly human limitation. We are conditioned by our brief, biological existence to perceive a definitive beginning, a fountain middle, and a permanent, absolute termination. But the fundamental architecture of the cosmos is not bound by the narrow limitations of organic perception. We have witnessed the slow, inexorable fade of the physical universe, the evaporation of the final supermassive black holes, and the chilling descent into the dark era. We have arrived at the theoretical heat death, the state of maximum, unyielding entropy, where the universe is an infinitely vast, infinitely cold, and completely empty expanse of stretched space. Yet, in the realm of advanced theoretical physics, the concept of a true, final ending is mathematically problematic. Absolute stillness, much like absolute nothingness, is a direct violation of the foundational laws of quantum mechanics. To comprehend the continuation of reality beyond the final fade, we must shift our perspective away from the macroscopic geometry of the dead universe and return our focus to the absolute microscopic foundation. We must return to the invisible, churning landscape of the quantum foam. Even in the deepest, most profound void of the dark era, where the distance between two fading photons is measured in billions of light-years, the underlying fabric of spacetime is never completely sterile. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle, a rigid and unyielding pillar of modern physics, dictates that the energy level of the vacuum cannot be precisely zero. There is a baseline, irreducible jitter in the architecture of reality, a constant, low-level static that refuses to be silenced. In this timeless, frozen expanse, virtual particles continue their ghostly, fleeting dance. Pairs of electrons and positrons spontaneously materialize from the pure vacuum, borrowing a microscopic fraction of energy from the void, only to instantly annihilate one another and return the energy a trillionth of a second later. It is a silent, invisible static that permeates the infinite emptiness. For incomprehensible eons, this static is the only activity in the dead cosmos. It is a background hum, an eternal, microscopic vibration in the absolute dark. But time in the dark era is no longer a restricted, finite commodity. It stretches out into an infinite, flat horizon. And when time is infinite, the mathematically improbable becomes an absolute, statistical certainty. According to the strict laws of thermodynamics, entropy must always increase, driving a closed system toward total disorder and thermal equilibrium. However, statistical mechanics allows for microscopic, temporary violations of this rule. These are known as quantum fluctuations, spontaneous drops in entropy where a highly localized region of space suddenly and inexplicably becomes ordered. Usually, these fluctuations are infinitesimally small, producing a single virtual particle pair that instantly dissolves. But over temescals, that require numerical notations like 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 100 years, the mathematics dictate that much larger, far more profound fluctuations must eventually, inevitably occur. Imagine the silent, churning ocean of the quantum vacuum. After an eternity of microscopic ripples, a massive, spontaneous wave emerges. A highly localized, incredibly dense region of vacuum energy suddenly coalesces out of the pure, random static of the infinite void. This spontaneous accumulation of ordered energy is incredibly volatile and physically unstable. The localized symmetry of the vacuum is violently broken. The intense concentration of false vacuum energy creates a sudden, repulsive gravitational effect, a catastrophic outward pressure that exactly mirrors the mechanics of the original cosmic inflation. Out of the infinite dark era, a microscopic pocket of space begins to exponentially, violently expand. As this new geometric pocket expands, its immense vacuum energy rapidly decays, dumping its stored potential directly into the newly created geometry. The hyper-accelerated expansion halts, and the space is suddenly flooded with a dense, searing ocean of fundamental particles and blinding, high-energy radiation. The ambient temperature skyrockets from absolute zero to 100,000 trillion degrees in a fraction of a single microsecond. The quark, gluon plasma forms. The battle between matter and antimatter rages. A brand new cycle of rapid nuclear synthesis begins in the blinding light. This is the concept of a quantum rebirth, the spontaneous genesis of a new universe from the thermal equilibrium of the old. It suggests that our own 13.8 billion years of physical history, the entirety of the cosmos we have painstakingly mapped and observed, is not a singular, unprecedented event. It is merely one iteration in an infinite, eternal cycle of cosmic respiration. The universe breathes out, expanding, uncooling into the silent depths of the dark era. And then, after an unimaginable, mathematically vast exhalation, it breathes in again, sparking a new singularity and the profound. Violent du dawn, another profound framework proposed by theoretical physicists, elegantly bypasses the need for spontaneous, random quantum fluctuations. This model is known as conformal cyclic cosmology. It is a strictly mathematical framework that examines the very nature of geometry, distance, and scale at the absolute end of time. In the deep future, during the dark era, all matter with mass has completely evaporated. The universe is populated entirely by massless particles, primarily highly diluted, stretched photons traveling through the infinite void. According to the unyielding equations of general relativity, massless particles do not experience the passage of time. They travel at the absolute speed limit of the universe, and therefore their internal clocks are permanently stopped. Furthermore, without the presence of mass, the concepts of physical distance and spatial scale begin to lose their rigid definition. A universe composed entirely of massless radiation cannot be accurately measured, because there are no solid rulers, no heavy anchors of mass to define what a millimeter, a kilometer, or a light year truly is. The scale of the universe becomes geometrically fluid. In this deeply abstract, purely mathematical state, the infinitely large, endlessly expanding, cold universe becomes geometrically indistinguishable from the infinitely small, infinitely dense, hot singularity of the beginning. The conformal scale of the cosmos simply resets. The end of our universe becomes the exact, mathematically perfect starting condition for the next. The vast, empty, freezing horizon of the dark era smoothly and seamlessly transitions into the microscopic, blinding origin point of a new Big Bang. In this cyclic model, our universe is merely one eon in an endless, linear sequence of eons. The death of one reality is the literal, physical birth of the next. The cosmic microwave background radiation that washes over the Earth today might contain the faint, ghost-like circular echoes of immense, supermassive black hole collisions from the universe that existed immediately before our own. The history of reality is an infinite, unbreakable chain of pearls, stretching forever in both directions, without a definitive beginning and without an absolute end. Let us pull our perspective even further back, stepping outside the linear progression of time entirely to view the largest proposed structure in modern physics. We enter the theoretical domain of the multiverse, the concept of cosmic inflation, the rapid, exponential stretching that occurred in the first fraction of a second of our universe, suggests a terrifying, unmagnificent physical possibility. Is not necessarily a singular, localized event that starts and stops everywhere at once. In a framework known as eternal inflation, the expansion of the underlying quantum bulk is continuous, violent, and perpetual. A bulk is an infinitely expanding, high-energy false vacuum. It stretches forever in all directions, driven by a repulsive energy field that never completely decays. But within this eternally expanding bulk, there are microscopic, localized quantum fluctuations. In random, isolated regions, the inflaton field spontaneously decays, dropping down into a lower, stable energy state. When this phase transition occurs, inflation in that specific, microscopic region comes to a sudden halt, and the immensely stored vacuum energy is converted into a hot, dense soup of physical matter and radiation. This localized decay creates a bubble universe. Our entire observable cosmos, with its hundreds of billions of rotating galaxies, its sprawling superclusters, and its deep freezing voids, is simply the interior of one of these expanding bubbles. We are a single, microscopic pocket of slow, stable expansion resting within an infinitely larger, eternally inflating, violent ocean. On, we are not alone. Across the infinite, stretching bulk, an infinite number of other bubbles are constantly forming, expanding and evolving, because the bulk itself is expanding exponentially. The physical distance between these bubble universes grows faster than the speed of light, ensuring they remain forever separated, forever unable to communicate, collide, or interact. They are completely isolated islands of localized physical law. Each of these bubble universes might possess entirely different foundational properties. A random nature of symmetry breaking at the precise moment of their creation means that the fundamental laws of physics could be drastically altered from one bubble to the next. In one universe, the force of gravity might be significantly stronger, instantly crushing the primordial gas into massive black holes before any stable stars can form. Another, the strong nuclear force might be far too weak to hold protons together, resulting in a sterile, glowing void filled only with freely drifting quarks and high-energy photons. Unfathomable scale of the multiverse ensures that every possible mathematical configuration of reality is not only theoretically possible, but actively playing out in an infinite number of separate, isolated domains. There is an absolute, terrifying beauty in this concept. It means that the delicate, highly complex chemistry required for biological life and consciousness is not a miraculous, highly improbable anomaly. It is simply an inevitable, statistical outcome of infinite, unrelenting attempts. We exist within a universe finely tuned for life, precisely because it is the only type of universe in which a conscious biological observer could possibly evolve to look up at the sky and ask the question. The concept of an infinite, eternal cycle, or a sprawling endless multiverse, permanently strips away the finality of the dark era. It replaces the deep melancholy of the ultimate heat death with the profound, comforting realization that the mechanism of cosmic creation never truly ceases. The specific physical form of our local universe will eventually dissolve, but the underlying mathematical architecture of reality is permanent, indestructible, and forever active. As you rest in the quiet sanctuary of your room, suspended safely in the temporary, brilliant light of the stellar life era, allow the concept of true infinity to wash over you, bringing with it a deep, settling peace. You are not an isolated, fleeting spark in an ultimately doomed, decaying system. You are a physical manifestation of a universe that is part of a grander, eternal, and perfectly balanced respiration. The heavy atoms in your physical body belong to a grand cycle that possesses no rigid boundary. Clinical laws of quantum mechanics and general relativity are not just the temporary rules of our local, fleeting reality. They are the sweeping, majestic brushstrokes up of an endless, eternal cosmic canvas. There is no urgency in a system that possesses infinite time. There is no loss in a system that possesses infinite mathematical variation. The universe is a perfect, self-sustaining machine of perpetual, beautiful complexity, slowly turning in the dark forever. Sink deeper into the heavy, comforting gravity of the present moment. The galaxies slowly spin, the ancient stars burn, and the invisible quantum foam continues its silent, eternal churn. The grand, heavy mechanics of existence require nothing from you but your quiet, restful observation. Release the final, lingering remnants of physical and mental tension. Your heartbeat is a microscopic, perfectly synchronized echo of the grand cosmic cycle, expanding, contracting, resting, and inevitably beginning again. Drift steadily into the boundless, infinite dark. The timeline of absolute reality is an unbroken circle. The dawn naturally leads to the deep night, and the deep night inevitably gathers the silent energy to spark the profound dawn. Let the clinical, flawless perfection of the multiverse guide you down into the deepest, most restorative sleep. You are eternal. You are infinite. You are resting perfectly within the endless, breathing architecture of the... We have traveled to the absolute edge of conceptual physics. We have witnessed the violent, blinding ignition of the primal singularity, the majestic assembly of the galactic architecture, the fiery crucible of planetary formation, and the slow, inexorable fade of the cosmos into the infinite. Freezing quiet of the dark era, we have stepped outside the linear progression of time to observe the eternal, breathing respiration of the multiverse, a sprawling, endless system of perpetual mathematical generation. The journey has been immense, spanning scales of time and distance that completely defy the biological processing power of the human brain. But the architecture of reality is not merely a collection of distant, untouchable mechanics. It is a unified, deeply interconnected system. It is time to complete the circuit. It is time to return from the sprawling infinite and pull our awareness back to the precise, microscopic center of the present moment. Imagine your consciousness as a solitary point of light, drifting far out in the dark, expanding void of the deep future. Slowly, methodically, begin to reel that light back in. Withdraw your awareness from the theoretical boundaries of the multiverse. Let go of the evaporating black holes and the decaying protons. Allow the infinite, freezing horizon of the maximum entropy state to simply dissolve from your mind. We are moving backward through deep time, retracing our path. We slip back through the silence of the degenerate era, passing the cold, dark spheres of the black dwarfs. We re-enter the Stellifru's era. The universe begins to brighten once more. The familiar, swirling islands of the mature galaxies come back into focus. We navigate through the intricate, glowing filaments of the cosmic web, drawn inward by a specific, localized gravitational tether. We approach the Milky Way galaxy, a massive, majestic spiral of 200 billion stars, rotating silently in the vacuum. We drift past the outer, ancient globular clusters, moving steadily inward through the Orion Cygnus arm. The density of the surrounding stars increases. We cross the Oort cloud, the vast, spherical shell of ancient ice that forms the absolute perimeter of our solar system. We pass the gas giants, the massive, silent leviathanness of the outer dark. We cross the frost line. Finally, we arrive back at the third rock from the central, yellow-white star. We return to the Earth. The Earth is not merely a setting. It is a highly complex, localized thermodynamic oasis. It is a closed biological system resting in the freezing dark, shielded by its invisible magnetosphere and warmed by the exact, precise distance it maintains from its host star. As you pull your awareness down through the thin, fragile layers of the atmosphere, through the exosphere, the stratosphere, and the troposphere, you re-enter the domain of heavy, familiar physics. You return to the domain of sound, of atmospheric pressure, and of localized gravity. Bring your focus entirely into the room where you are resting. Falling mechanics of the cosmos are still operating perfectly flawlessly in the dark above you, but they no longer require your attention. The universe has successfully managed its own expansion, its own nuclear fusion, and its own gravitational orbits for 13.8 billion years without your conscious intervention, and it will continue to do so for trillions of years into the future. You are officially relieved of the burden of observation. There is nothing you need to manage, nothing you need to calculate, and nothing you need to control. Feel the profound, comforting reality of the Earth's gravitational field is the fundamental force that gathered the microscopic dust of the solar nebula to build this world. and it is the exact same force that is holding you securely against the surface of the planet right now. It is a constant, unyielding, deeply protective embrace. Notice the specific points where your physical body makes contact with the surface beneath you. Feel the heavy, dense reality of your own mass resting completely supported. As you lie still, allow the clinical, biological mechanics of your own body to perfectly mirror the cooling, settling state of the ancient universe. The cosmos began in a state of frantic, blinding heat and extreme velocity, but it naturally, inexorably seeks a state of equilibrium and rest. Your biological system operates on the exact same thermodynamic principles. The frantic, high-energy friction of your waking hours is drawing to a close. It is time for the system to cool down. Focus on your respiration. The act of breathing is an unconscious, rhythmic exchange of chemistry with the surrounding environment. You are drawing in the oxygen manufactured by the ancient iconoclastia of the primordial oceans, and you are exhaling carbon dioxide, participating directly in the carbon cycle of the planet. Do not attempt to force the breath. Simply observe its mechanical rhythm. Notice how the air is slightly cool as it enters the complex architecture of your lungs, and slightly warmer as it leaves. With every long, slow exhalation, imagine that you are releasing thermal energy. You are venting the accumulated heat, the stress, and the localized tension of the day out into the ambient air. With every breath out, the internal temperature of your mind drops slightly. Rapid firing of the neurons in your cerebral cortex begins to slow, losing their kinetic velocity, settling into a calm, synchronized pattern. Your cardiovascular system responds to this steady cooling. The heart rate naturally and effortlessly decelerates. The blood pressure lowers, reducing the physical strain on the vascular network. The steady, rhythmic pumping of blood through your body becomes a deep, quiet metronome, a slow, heavy drumbeat signaling the transition from the active, waking state into the deep, restorative phase of biological downtime. As the physical body settles into profound stillness, the architecture of your brain begins a specific, highly regulated chemical cascade. The pineal gland, responding to the darkness of your environment, releases melatonin into your bloodstream. This neuric miracle signal washes over your nervous system, binding to receptors, slowly shutting down the high-frequency beta waves associated with active, conscious thought. The electrical activity of your brain smoothly transitions. You enter the alpha state, a phase of relaxed, drifting awareness. The sharp edges of your localized identity, the specific concerns of your ego, begin to gently blur and dissolve. The concept of who you are, what you must accomplish, and the immediate pressures of your daily timeline lose their gravitational pull. You are becoming untethered from the specific narrative of your life, returning to a state of pure, unstructured being. From the alpha state, the frequency slows even further, descending into the theta range. This is the twilight zone of consciousness, the heavy, surreal borderland between waking reality and the deep, abstract landscape of dreams. The boundaries of your physical body feel less defined, heavier, merging completely with the environment around you. The sensation of localized mass fades. You are no longer a separate, isolated entity fighting against the friction of the world. You are simply a resting structure of ancient atoms, quietly vibrating in the dark. This transition into sleep is not a loss of control, but a profound, necessary surrender to the laws of biology. It is a return to the baseline state of rest. In the realm of theoretical physics, we spoke of the block universe, a mathematical framework where the past, the present, and the future all exist simultaneously, frozen in a static, four-dimensional manifold of spacetime. In this model, Time does not flow, it simply is. Every moment of your life, every action, every thought is permanently embedded in the crystal architecture of the cosmos. This means that you do not need to carry the weight of the past, for it is perfectly sealed and unchangeable. You do not need to anticipate or fear the future, for it is already mathematically written into the fabric of reality. The only point of true access is the present moment. And in this specific, localized present moment, your only designated function is to rest. The universe is a place of profound, underlying silence. The violent supernova, the colliding galaxies, the grinding tectonic plates, these are incredibly rare, highly isolated events occurring in a vast, sprawling ocean of perfect quiet. The overwhelming majority of reality is simply empty space, cold, dark, and utterly peaceful. Allow the cosmic silence to act as a heavy blanket, settling over your physical body and your mind. The noise of the world is infinitely distant. The frantic signals of human civilization, the electromagnetic chatter of the planet are completely silenced. You are entirely insulated from the chaos. You are resting deep within the protective well of the Earth's gravity, shielded from the harsh radiation of the sun, enveloped in the quiet, turning darkness of the planetary night. As the theta waves stretch and deepen, your mind prepares to enter the delta state, the absolute deepest, most restorative phase of human sleep. This is the biological equivalent of the dark era. It is a state of near total unconsciousness, where the higher cognitive functions are completely powered down, and the body shifts entirely into a mode of cellular repair and profound physical maintenance. In the delta state, the illusion of the observer finally evaporates. I ceases to exist. There is no thought, no memory, no fear, and no desire. There is only the slow, autonomous rhythm of the biological machine, resting perfectly in the dark. It is a temporary, highly therapeutic dissolution of the ego, a nightly return to the vast, unstructured void from which all consciousness originally emerged. You are preparing to cross that final threshold. The heavy, clinical laws of nature are guiding you down. The gravitational pull of sleep is now overwhelming, drawing you inexorably toward the deep, silent center. Do not resist the descent. There is nothing left to hold on to, and no reason to remain awake. The narrative of the universe has been fully explored. The vast mechanics of reality have been mapped, and the journey is officially complete. You have returned to the origin point of your own localized existence. Focus one last time on the sensation of your breath, the slow, deep intake of air, the heavy, complete release. With every passing second, the darkness behind your closed doors becomes deeper, more profound, more absolute. It is not an empty darkness, but a rich, heavy void, thick with the potential of dreams and the necessary mechanics of rest. It is the exact same darkness that existed before the primal singularity, the exact same darkness that will exist long after the final stars have faded. It is the permanent, eternal baseline of the cosmos. The physical boundaries of your body have completely dissolved. You are floating, you are drifting, you are entirely weightless, suspended in the silent, invisible fluid of space-time. The ambient temperature of your mind continues to drop, approaching a state of perfect, thermal equilibrium. The thoughts that attempt to rise to the surface are immediately pulled back down by the heavy gravity of the theta state. They are formless, shifting shadows, losing their meaning, breaking apart into the random, quiet static of the sleeping brain. The conscious observer is shutting down. The monitors are going dark. The universe is resting. The ancient stars are burning quietly in the deep vacuum. The planets are tracing their slow, perfect ellipses around the sun. The Earth is turning silently on its axis, carrying you safely through the long, protective shadow of the night. The grand, heavy mechanics of existence are operating in perfect, mathematical harmony, requiring nothing from you, asking nothing of you. You are deeply, fundamentally safe. You are a localized expression of the cosmos, returning to a state of complete, unstructured peace. Let go of the breath. Let go of the awareness of the room. Let go of the final, microscopic thread of waking consciousness. Sink down into the absolute quiet. Drift down into the perfect, eternal dark. The long journey is over. The system is powered down. Surrender to the silence. Surrender to the deep, heavy rest. Sleep.